Let the doors be open. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Order of the day, ordre du jour. Consideration at second reading of Bill C-26, an act to amend the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act, and the Income Tax Act.
Monsieur Morneau, appuyé par Ms. Philpott, propose que le projet de loi.
Mr. Morneau, seconded by Ms. Philpott, moves that Bill C-26, an act to amend the Canada Pension Plan, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act, and the Income Tax Act be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Finance.
Débat.
Debate.
L'honorable ministre des...
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 83-1, I wish to table a Notice of Ways and Means motion to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 22, 2016, and other measures. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, I ask that an order of the day be designated for consideration of the motion. Madame la Présidente, conformément...
Madam Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 83-1, I have the honour of tabling a notice of motions, of a Ways and Means motion that would execute certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 22nd, 2016, and implementing other measures. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, I ask that this motion be added to the order of the day.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, honourable members. As you know, a stronger Canada Pension Plan was a key part of the promise we made to Canadians when we promised to help the middle class and those working hard to join it. On June 20th in Vancouver, we delivered. Canada's governments agreed to enhance the Canada Pension Plan to give Canadians a more generous public pension that will help them to retire in dignity. I like to think we showed everyone just how well our country can work when our governments work together, even in the face of tough challenges. We worked through our differences and never wavering on our commitment to the people we serve. In doing so, we proved that collaboration around the federal, provincial, territorial tables can deliver results. I'd like to thank each and every one of my provincial and territorial counterparts for the hard work, diligence, foresight, and principled cooperation that they displayed in reaching this historic agreement on behalf of Canadians. Now that all 9 CPP participating provinces have fully confirmed their support for implementing the Vancouver Agreement, we have the obligation to carefully consider the legislation before us today, which will help make this agreement a reality. And we must do so with the full understanding of what is at stake, no less than the opportunity to provide future generations of Canadians with a more generous public pension in their retirement years. Madame la Présidente,
Madam Speaker, a safe and reliable retirement is a very important goal for all Canadians who are working hard. We know that middle-class Canadians are working harder than ever, and many of them fear that they will not have saved enough when they choose to retire. This is a palpable feeling when we knock on doors and speak to people, when we have open consultation sessions, when we speak to people as part of our work. We also know that young people in particular are having a difficult time ensuring or making a safe retirement for themselves. I've heard these concerns many times during this month, during the public consultations that we held with secondary students in Toronto. These concerns are legitimate ones. In-depth studies led by the provincial governments and departments show that the number of families, rather 1.1 million families, are now facing a significant drop in their quality of life at the time of retirement. Middle-class families who don't have a workplace pension plan are at particular risk of not having enough money for their retirement.
Agreed with this conclusion in working towards our agreed-upon enhancement to the CPP. We've developed a carefully targeted approach which is reflected in the legislation we have before us today. Taken together, it's a comprehensive package that will increase CPP benefits while striking an appropriate balance between short-term economic considerations and longer-term gains. So what does a stronger CPP mean for Canadians, Madam Speaker? First and foremost, it means there'll be more money from the CPP waiting for Canadians when they retire. This means they'll be able to focus on the things that matter, like spending time with their family, rather than on worrying about making ends meet. Once fully in place, the CPP enhancement will increase the maximum CPP retirement benefit by about 50%. The current maximum benefit is $13,110. In today's dollar terms, the enhanced CPP represents an increase of nearly $7,000 to a maximum benefit of nearly $20,000. The enhancement that we agreed upon does two things to make this happen for contributors. First, it will increase the share of annual earnings received during retirement from 1/4 to 1/3. This means that an individual making $50,000 a year in today's dollars over their working life will receive about $16,000 per year in retirement, instead of roughly $12,000 today. And second, it will increase by 14% the maximum income range covered by the CPP, so that those who earn more will receive more in retirement. The positive impact of these changes is significant. It will meaningfully reduce the share of families at risk of not saving enough for retirement, as well as the degree of undersaving. The Department of Finance has estimated that by strengthening the CPP, will reduce the share of families at risk of not having adequate retirement savings by about 1/4, from 24% to 18%, when considering income from the three pillars of the retirement income system and savings from other financial and non-financial assets. A stronger CPP is also the right tool at the right time to improve the retirement income security of younger workers. It's an opportunity for today's hard-working Canadians to give their children, their grandchildren, and future generations a more secure retirement. The Department of Finance has concluded that retiring in comfort will be even more of a challenge for these future generations. That's in part because they're expected to live longer than previous generations. But also, if current trends continue, younger Canadians will be less likely than previous generations to work in jobs with retirement benefits that are paid for by their employers. And if the current low-interest rate environment persists, their savings may also grow more slowly than previous generations. In the face of these challenges, our government decided to do what Canadians do best when faced with a problem. We worked together. We worked with the provinces and territories and agreed to strengthen the Canada Pension Plan so there'll be more money waiting for future generations of Canadians when they retire. But that's not all. The legislation we're debating today also includes enrichments to CPP disability and survivor benefits. And for most Canadians, all these increased CPP benefits will come from only a 1% increase in contribution rates. We're making sure to give individuals and their employers plenty of time to adjust to the modest increase, making sure it's small and gradual and starting in 2019. For example, an individual with earnings of $54,900 will contribute about $6 more a month in 2019. By the end of the 7-year phase-in period, contributions for that individual would be about $43 more per month. And because new employee CPP contributions will be tax deductible as opposed to being eligible for a tax credit, Canadians will not experience an increase in tax if registered retirement savings plan or employee pension plan contributions, which are deductible, are reduced in response to this increase in CPP contributions. Today's legislation, as agreed upon with the provinces, will also ensure that low-income Canadians are not financially burdened as a result of the extra contributions. It will do so by enhancing the working income tax benefit to roughly offset incremental CPP contributions, leaving eligible low-income Canadians with little to no change in disposable income, while still securing higher retirement income for them. Taken together, these tax measures will account for $970 million in federal fiscal support in 2021 and 2022. Dans les circonstances, il ne fait aucun doute.
In this context, it's clear, Madam Speaker, that a strengthened Canada Pension Plan will benefit all Canadians. It will also benefit the Canadian economy in general. Thanks to the increased benefits within this strengthened program, retirees will have more money, which they will be able to use for things like healthy food, transportation, and expenses related to accommodation. This will allow for the creation of jobs, and it will continue to strengthen the middle class.
The Department of Finance undertook extensive research on the impact of a strengthened CPP, and this analysis included a rigorous study of the potential economic impacts of the various enhancement scenarios being discussed with the provinces. Our research found that over time, over the long term, greater CPP benefits will boost demand and increase savings overall. This will boost economic output and make more money available for investment. As a result, gross domestic product is estimated to increase between 0.05 to 0.09% over the long term. Employment levels are also projected to be permanently higher by about 0.03 to 0.06%, equivalent to about 6,000 to 11,000 jobs based on 2015 levels of employment. So, Madam Speaker, we can see from all of these facts that a stronger CPP is good for Canadians and good for the overall economy. This should come as no surprise, since the CPP is a good and solid program. For over 50 years now, the CPP has been helping ensure that all workers in Canada have a minimum level of financial security in retirement. The most recent stats tell us that 5.2 million people in Canada received $37.3 billion in benefits from the CPP. Selon un rapport du Conference Board du Canada,
according to a Conference Board of Canada report, there was a significant drop of 25% in seniors' poverty in Canada over the last 40 years. The poverty rate went from 36.9% in 1976 to 12.3% in 2010. The Conference Board concluded that this drop is largely due to the establishment of the CPP and the QPP in Quebec.
Is similarly well regarded around the world for its impressive record of investment performance and management excellence. The CPPIB operates at arm's length from governments with a mandate to invest CPP funds in the best interests of plan members. It's been acclaimed by international bodies such as the World Bank as the model of an independent, transparent, and accountable public pension fund management organization. As the manager of a large fund program with millions of contributors, the CPP Investment Board is able to take advantage of economies of scale in order to deliver strong net returns. Over the past 10 years, the CPPIB has delivered a 10-year average nominal rate of return of 6.8% on existing CPP assets. This is above the 6.1% nominal rate of return identified by the Chief Actuary to ensure the sustainability of the Canada Pension Plan. With this rock-solid investment structure as its foundation, the CPP provides a safe, secure, and predictable benefit, which means that Canadians can worry less about outliving their savings or having their savings impacted by significant market downturns. The recently released 27th Actuarial Report on the Canada Pension Plan concludes that the existing CPP is on a sustainable financial footing at its current contribution rate of 9.9% for at least the next 75 years. Bill C-26 will make amendments to the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act to make the CPPIB the manager of the improved CPP. And now that Bill C-26 is before us for consideration in Parliament, the Chief Actuary will conduct an actuarial assessment of the enhancement to ensure that it's on a sustainable, long-term financial footing. CPP benefits are also fully indexed to prices, which reduces the risk that inflation will gradually erode the purchasing power of retirement savings. As well, the CPP is a good fit for Canada's changing job market. It helps to fill the gap left by declining workplace pension coverage, and it's portable across jobs and provinces, which promotes labour mobility and reflects how Canadians currently live, work, and retire. And with the automatic collection of contributions for all workers, the CPP is a simple way to save for retirement. It also provides important income support through disability, death, survivor, children's, and post-retirement benefits for eligible contributors and their families. By supporting today's legislation, parliamentarians will not only be boosting how much each Canadian will get from their CPP pension in the future, you'll be making a great program even greater. And with 75% of Canadians in support of a stronger CPP, you'll be acting on one of the highest priorities of Canadians.
I am honored to have been able to work with our provincial and territorial ministers and officials to help improve this program. I would encourage you all to support this bill, Bill C-26. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires?
Thank you very much. And although it would be wonderful to be the member beside me, I'm just Elgin, Middlesex, London. So thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the Minister of Finance for his speech, informative speech. But I do have a few questions for him, and it's directed for conversations that we've had with CFIB and the president of CFIB, Dan Kelly. And I just want to read a couple of his quotes. I do know that prior to politics, the minister had great dealings with investments. So I just want to ask him these things. In the two quotes that I'm going to read to you today, if you could just respond, if the member could just respond to that, that would be fantastic. The first quote is, "It is tremendously disappointing to see that the finance ministers are putting Canadian wages, hours and jobs in jeopardy and willfully moving to make an already shaky economy even worse. Despite all the talks, it appears that the jobs and the economy are not particularly high priorities for the governments that have signed off on this deal." And that was from President of CFIB, Dan Kelly. Secondly, he noted, "2/3 of small firms say they will have to freeze or cut salaries, and over 1/3 say they will have to reduce hours or jobs in their business in response to the CPP hike." I'm just wondering if the Minister of Finance can speak about these things, because I know CFIB was not at the table when they were consulting small businesses. And since small businesses is part of the middle class, because in my community of Elgin, Middlesex, London, those small businesses are owned by the middle class. I'm wondering if the Minister could speak on that. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister.
Well, I'd like to thank the member for her comments and her question, and provide some background both on the process that led us to get to the conclusion that we should work together to enhance the Canada Pension Plan, and the impacts that we expect that will have on Canadians and on our economy. So first of all, the process. We were very clear with Canadians in our election platform that we wanted to work to enhance the Canada Pension Plan, because we recognized that so many Canadians were finding themselves with less of an opportunity for pension down the road because of declining pension plan participation. That led us to present that to Canadians. We then, as you know, presented that to our provincial counterparts to talk about that decision, and got consensus that we all were seeing the same thing, a real challenge in future opportunities for Canadians to retire in dignity. So what we came up with was an approach that was very gradual, but led to significant impacts over the long term. The gradual nature of that approach, starting in 2019, going out to 2025, means that for both individuals and for businesses, there's an opportunity to move very gradually, having a modest impact. More importantly, we then did research to show, and just if one more second, to show that in fact the long-term economic impacts are positive for the economy, are positive for employment, and that's the research that leads us to say this is the right thing to do.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for, the Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the work that he's put on this CPP bill. One of the questions that we were listening to from the residents outside during the election, people across Canada is that they wanted an enhancement to the CPP and they needed something drastic to happen now. But this doesn't do anything for actually anybody maximizing it for the next 40 years. So what are we doing about the pensioners that are current pensioners that are collecting CPP now, or the people on the cusp of retiring in the next 10 years?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
I'd like to thank the member for his question and recognize that as he did, we spoke to many Canadians that were in fact concerned about the retirement outcomes. So that led us to do a number of things that we think are going to have a positive impact. So first and foremost, we recognize that for senior singles, for seniors that are single, there's many that are living in difficult situations. So we took that into account when we decided to increase the guaranteed income supplement by 10%, impacting those single seniors by up to $947, having a very positive income on outcomes for a challenged group. Then we took a look at how we could deal with the Canada Pension Plan in a way that recognized some key principles. We did want to recognize that the impact of changes in pension plans is a long-term secular one with declining participation. And so we should be thinking about this issue in a long-term way to ensure that we help people that are going to be in a more difficult situation in the future. That long-term approach is also enabling us to fully fund this advantage, which we feel is fiscally responsible. So we recognize that it will help people that are in the workforce today to save enough for the future and do it in a responsible way that helps us to have a better economic outcome for the economy and a better outcome for them over the long term.
Comments, questions, et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The death benefit is currently at a maximum of around $2,500, which is hardly enough to pay for a funeral and wrapping up the affairs of our most precious. I was wondering if the Finance Minister could inform us about the negotiations that have been occurring and which have been advocated on behalf or by the Premier of Manitoba on increasing the amount for the Canada Death Benefit.
Minister.
Well, I'd like to thank the member for his question. And first of all, we had a very good discussion with the provinces as we came to the conclusion that we wanted to enhance the Canada Pension Plan. We had a number of issues brought up, and as the member notes, the province of Manitoba brought up the idea that we should consider other enhancements to the Canada Pension Plan. In response to that, we together agreed that as the provinces and the federal government, as the participating members of the Canada Pension Plan do on a triennial basis, we will look this December at potential changes to the Canada Pension Plan. We're currently doing research around the impacts of those prospective changes, both on individuals and the fiscal impacts, the financial costs. And so as we do that, we will bring that information forward to the provincial finance ministers in December and have a discussion about the merits of additional changes.
Comments, questions, et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Durham.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What concerns me most about this government is on fiscal and economic policy affecting all Canadians, they say one thing one day and then take a totally opposite view the next. The Prime Minister opposed deficits, then turned to $10 billion deficits, and now we have a $30 billion deficit, Madam Speaker. And the Minister of Finance is the same. Before he ran, when he was a pension executive in Toronto, he wrote a book called The Real Retirement, saying retirees were much better off than most experts were saying. But today he said people cannot retire in dignity. In his book, he said, I quote, it makes little sense, unquote, to incent early retirement, yet he then rolled back old age security modernizations. Today, he talks about this being the right time and said there would actually be job gain, Madam Speaker. That contradicts what his own department is saying, which saying there will be job losses as a result of these reforms. On a morning where Bombardier has just announced 2,000 layoffs, amid an economic crisis in Alberta, the flight of capital, and the imposition of a carbon tax that will make manufacturing uncompetitive in Ontario, why is this government implementing yet another barrier to job creation in Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, very happy to answer that question and pleased to see that the Honourable Member has taken the time to not only purchase but to read my book. which is excellent. I would encourage him to read all the chapters in the book, because what he'll find when he does that is that in that book, myself and my co-author identified some very significant challenges facing current Canadians. Challenges around future rates of return, challenges around declining pension plan coverage, challenges that are going to make it more difficult for people to save for retirement over the long term. And it was exactly those challenges, Madam Speaker, that we considered as we moved forward in enhancing the Canada Pension Plan. Long-term, fiscally responsible ways to help Canadians to save for their retirement. That's exactly what we've done. And more importantly, we've done it in a way that, again, if I would encourage the honourable member to read the entire Department of Finance report, he would see that over the long term, what we do show is that there will be economic advantages for our economy and there will be growth in jobs. We are thinking about the long term, Madam Speaker, as we work on behalf of Canadian families. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for his speech. I would appreciate a book signed by yourself. I read your book, and I believe, and yes. Thank you. The question is that we believe that with this CPP tax hike, Canadians are taking huge risk, and many risks. And some of them are, first of all, they don't know what they're getting themselves into it, or what the government is getting them into. They cannot tolerate the extra risk at this difficult economic time, and they don't know if the program is properly priced and accounted for it, and also they don't know if the returns are worth it. So the question to the Minister is that where are the guarantees for Canadians that they will be going through this risk and taking this risk is going to work for them and is going to be something that they won't regret down the road?
Good question.
So I just want to remind the member that it was resuming debate. So it was part of your speech, and therefore you're into your speech.
Congratulations.
Beforehand, then, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I would like...
It's Friday.
I gained 2 minutes, didn't I?
It's Friday.
First, I would like to seek the consent of the House to share my time with the member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Thank you. Madam Speaker.
Does the honourable member have unanimous consent to share his time? Okay, then so be it. Resuming debate, the honourable member.
Madam Speaker, apparently this government distrusts the ability of Canadians to plan for their own retirement. There is no other reason for this ill-conceived tax hike that the members opposite like to pretend is not a tax on Canadians. When the Canada Pension Plan was first introduced in 1965, it was intended to assist those Canadians who were not already part of workplace pension plans. The government apparently felt such a plan was necessary to assist Canadians in their retirement planning. The world has changed since then, but the Liberals still believe we are living in 1965. They still believe it is the role of the government to tell the people what they can do with their money. They still believe that the Canadians are not capable of determining for themselves what they will financially when they retire and preparing for their retirement on their own. As a result, we have this bill, C-26, which will take money from the pockets of hard-working Canadians who are being given no choice in the matter. The benefits of this tax hike, if any, and do not be fooled when they tell you it's not a tax hike, by the way, will happen at some point in the far future. These changes do nothing to help today's seniors who may be struggling to make ends meet. Why do I say that this is a tax hike, Madam Speaker, when the government says it's not? Well, as the cliche goes, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it is a duck. If the government taxes money from you and give you nothing in return, then that is a tax. The Canada Pension Plan receives money from two sources, employers and employees. They make equal payments into the fund, but at the end, only one of them receive a pension from those payments, and that is the employees. For the employer, CPP is just one of many costs of doing business, and this government, with these changes, is increasing the tax load on employers while pretending that is not a tax. I was a small businessman before the people of Edmonton Manning give me their trust as their representative in Ottawa. I know what it means to be an employer and to have to pay my employees. I know firsthand how much government red tape is involved in running a business. And you can call this increase in CPP whatever you like, but business owners knows the truth. This is a tax grab. The Liberals can pull all the lipstick on this pick that they like, but at the end of the day, they are telling these businesses, the business owners, to pay more money with absolutely nothing in return. The return for the country is something different. When business owners are faced with an increase in costs, then adjustments have to be made somewhere else. The government is mandating this increase in taxes for nebulous benefits at some point in the future. But business owners has to deal with the tax now. As I see it, they are faced with two choices in this situation. With this increase in costs imposed on them by the government, they will have to find other areas to cut back. One way would be to freeze or even cut wages so that the employer's tax burden do not increase. How does this help employees? I don't know. The alternative is that they will freeze hiring or even lay off employees. Personnel costs are a big part of doing business, and it does not make sense that the government would increase this burden on business owners. This extra tax is putting thousands of Canadian jobs at risk. In 2015, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business looked at a similar CPP hike scenario. They found it would eliminate 110,000 jobs and permanently lower wages by nearly 1%. They are not alone in predicting the negative consequence of an increase in CPP premiums. The Fraser Institute found that a 1% point increase in the CPP contribution rate reduces private saving by 0.9 points. That doesn't provide them much benefit. What does this tax mean, Madam Speaker, for working Canadians? The government tells us that we should be happy, that there will be more money for us when we retire. It assumes that Canadians are not using saving vehicles such as the Registered Retirement Saving Plan or the tax-free saving account. Perhaps that is why they reduced the TFSA contribution level set by the previous Conservative government. When these changes are introduced, Canadians will take home less paycheck every week. The government wants us to think that isn't much, that we will never notice it. But every penny less in a person's pocket makes a difference to that person. So what's the effects of this tax be as people see their pay reduced? With less money coming in it, will take that much longer for new graduates to pay off their student loans. Then in return, delays their ability to buy that first house. That has an impact on the economy that perhaps the government hasn't thought enough about. We want to encourage Canadians to save, but by reducing their pay, we take the opportunity away from them. Though this tax increase, the Liberals are saying, we don't trust you to be smart in how you spend your own money, so we will do it for you. Madam Speaker, Canadians have already shown that they know how to handle their own money. They don't need the government or this government to do it for them. We already have a retirement system that is the envy of the world. Canadians are saving more today for retirement than ever before without this tax grab. Poverty among seniors has dropped significantly in recent years. According to Statistics Canada, the share of Canadian seniors living on low income has dropped from 29% in 1970, when the CPP was in the infancy, to 3.7 today, among the lowest in the world. Conservatives believe that Canadians should be able to manage their own money. It is not the role of the government to do so. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, Liberal promises on financial matters are somewhat suspect. It was only a year ago the Prime Minister was promising to hold the budget deficit at $10 billion, and we all know how quickly that promise was broken. How can the government expect Canadians to believe anything they say about the CPP benefit in 2050? If the government was truly serious about helping Canadians to save for their retirement, it would reinstate the TFSA contribution level that's set by the Conservative government. Treat Canadians like adults and let them choose how to save their retirement. It appears as if this government has decided that CPP should be the only method of retirement savings Canadians use, but that was never the intention. In 1964, the Liberal minister responsible for introducing the Canada Pension Plan said the CPP, and I quote, not intended to provide all the retirement income which many Canadians wish to have. This is a matter of individual choice and, in the government's view, should properly be left to personal saving and private pension plans. That was a good idea then. It is a good idea now. It's the time for this government to show Canadians the respect that they deserve. For the good of Canadians, they should abandon this bill. Thank you.
I just want to remind members to stand up when I ask for questions and comments and not while someone's delivering their speech. So questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Oakville.
I thank the honourable member for his address. This is a big issue in Oakville. When I knocked on doors, met with people in Oakville, I have heard many, many concerns raised about do people have sufficient funds to retire on, trouble with savings, with some of the low-quality, poor jobs that people are experiencing right now across Canada. I also heard that there was a concern about private plans moving to defined contribution that puts the risk of investment and the discipline to put the money into retirement with the individual instead of with the plan. Can the member reflect on the benefits of a defined benefit plan versus the defined contribution, which is a significant advantage of this Canada Pension Plan?
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Thanks for the member opposite on his question. I think if we can call this as a business case, there's a lot of risks are being taken here, and the biggest problem of it, and those risks are not the choice of Canadians, but the impose of the government on the Canadian people. So it's very hard to measure where there's really no benchmarks that set. I mean, what the minister have said earlier, a lot of stuff that don't make sense. I don't know, I mean, if he's calling a growth as a matter of inflation, in the artificial inflation in terms of how you make more money by taxing people and consider that as a growth. Canadians are taking a lot of risks. If this is a business case, it's a failure. We have to look at it very carefully, and we have to consult more to be able to have Canadians have more input in it so it can be safe and it can be sound and it can be work for Canadians.
Awesome. Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I thank my colleague for his speech. But what has happened, the pension gap and the crisis of Canadians being able to save less for their retirement worsened considerably under the Stephen Harper government. Can my colleague explain to this House what lessons their party has learned from these failures?
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
I'm very surprised what failures the honourable member opposite is talking about. When we introduced the FSA, that was the pleasure of every Canadian. We've seen it at the door. We've heard from Canadians, and we've done lots in that fashion to make sure that Canadians save more and that they're more secure. So I'm not really sure what he's referring to when he calls it failures. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for, Sonia Lambton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my honourable colleague for his speech. I was alarmed to see that Finance Canada did an analysis of this proposed CPP premium increase and said it will hurt the economy. It will reduce jobs, reduce GDP, reduce business investment, reduce disposable income, and reduce private savings. So with all of these negative impacts that are going to happen over the next 8 years and no benefit for anybody for 40 years, I wonder if the member could comment on what he thinks about this plan.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, thank you. Thanks to the honourable colleague here for a wonderful question. I think, as I said, to mount the additional risks that Canadians are taking in this fashion is that they don't know the result. They don't know the outcome of this risk that is being taken. And as for the future, I don't think no one will be around. I hope everybody will live over 100 years in this room, but no one will be around to see if this is going to work. That's why the government is doing what they're doing, and that's very unfortunate method in doing business, in doing politics in Canada.
We have time for a brief question. The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The honourable member, I'd invite you to come to my riding and
you need to address
yes, I would like to invite the honourable member to come to my riding to meet some seniors that are actually suffering today from the lack of savings and pension plan that they have. And given the precarious nature of employment today amongst our youth, my own son, has been working 2 and 3 part-time jobs just to try to get by, and the massive increase in the cost of housing that has occurred. This is not a tax. This is an investment in future generations of Canadians. They're going to allow them to live better than our seniors are living today. Does the member not deny that these facts exist, or is he completely out of touch with reality?
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning, a very brief
Thank you very much. As a member, also I represent the people, and I have seniors in my areas. And I tell you something, I'm a businessman, and this does not make any sense for any businessman. It's a tax on businesses, it's tax on Canadians, and let Canadians save for themselves instead of taking those money away from them without their consent first and without their knowing what the risk that they're taking.
Resuming debate, reprise au débat, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to rise, and I thank my colleague for sharing his time with me. He made an excellent speech. He very clearly outlined our position on Bill C-26, but allow me to come back to something worrisome. Seniors, I think, should be concerned today, worried about what happened in the House earlier when the Minister of Finance announced or made his remarks on Bill C-26. The Minister of Finance said, we clearly said in the election campaign that we wanted to enhance the CPP. Now, we've seen the Liberals in action for the past year. Is it a reference for them to say we stated clearly during the election campaign that we would do something? No, it's not. Now, if we go back to the election campaign, what do average citizens understand when they're voters who elect candidates, they see them put forth their positions, and then after the fact, they're told, we are going to enhance the CPP. What does that mean? What should seniors understand from that? What should the seniors in the riding of Oakville think? My colleague opposite said that in his community, people have lower salaries, people need benefits, they need assistance. Well, what does that mean? It means if we vote for a certain party, we're going to see some immediate benefits. Now, when people understand that an election promise means that your retirement pension plan will be enhanced, they don't expect it to take or for it never to happen. They expect the government to do things immediately, even if it makes no sense whatsoever what the party's saying, if it needs to keep its promises. Now, the changes outlined will start in 2019. And go right to 2025. Madam Speaker, when we talk about a long-term strategy, like the Minister of Finance did this morning, we have to put ourselves in senior shoes. For someone who's 75, the long term isn't the same as it is for someone who's 50. Who are the seniors who are misled by this government? Who are the ones who are actually going to benefit from an improved CPP? Madam Speaker, and that's the question we need to ask. And that's what the danger is with the Liberal government. And they haven't, it's not what they're saying that's dangerous, but we just can't believe what they're saying, because what they're not saying is even more dangerous, Madam Speaker. Now, during the last election campaign, if the Liberals had said to seniors, we're going to be enhancing your CPP in 7 years from now, in 8 years from now, there isn't a senior, not a single senior in my riding. And the average incomes aren't very high in my riding either. We went through very difficult years in the Thetford Mines area, especially with the asbestos crisis. So salaries aren't high in my riding. Miners don't have a lot of money. And all of a sudden they're being told, we're going to be enhancing your CPP. Now, who in this House wouldn't want to see an increase? Especially people earning less money. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, that's not the will of the Liberals. Not only is it not what they want to do, they're going to be increasing taxes on the same people. These people who can't afford, so there'll be no benefits, first of all. Well, they started by increasing their taxes, and people who are earning less, have fewer resources, will be the first people to suffer from the arrogant Liberal attitude to promise virtually anything and to simply deliver it when they can, if they can. Now, I hope that in 2019, Madam Speaker, we'll be here to clean up this House, because if we leave them in power for another 4 years after that, it'll be absolutely terrible. We won't be able to turn anything back. Now, it's important, Madam Speaker, to talk about the reality. The government's been in power for a year, and this is the context that C26 is being announced today. The government broke its promise of running up a modest deficit. It's spending 3 times more. TD Bank last week said that the deficit might be $34 billion because of the economic situation. Because of the economic situation. Well, what does that mean? That means that there haven't been any jobs created. They're out. The promises to improve the quality of life for Canadians and the fate of the middle class, because the way to improve things for the middle class is to give them good jobs, to help them find good jobs. That's a reality, Madam Speaker. And what's worrisome, and this is why I'm worried about the announcement made this morning by the Minister of Finance, is that Mr. Trudeau, or rather, I apologize, Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister, I'm sorry that I used his actual name here, but the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, isn't concerned about it. He doesn't see it as a problem. Now, maybe it'll be $34 billion. The economic situation isn't there. Growth rates have been lower than we had expected, but it's not a problem. Canadians will just pay for it later. Will there be any money left, Madam Speaker, in the public purse to pay for these promises made by the government in C26 for seniors later on? There are no answers to that, Madam Speaker, because since the beginning they've been improvising. Now, the government broke its promise to reduce taxes for small and medium-sized businesses. And if there's something that's going to have an impact on SMEs, Madam Speaker, it's C26, because they're going to have to increase their expenditures as well. The government talks about helping small and medium-sized businesses, but they want to promise the best. They're not talking about the worst, but they're imposing the worst on them. That is exactly what we're seeing here, Madam Speaker. That's the reality of this Liberal government. Now, Madam Speaker, I can clearly state today that what the Liberal government did is betray seniors with the false promise of improving their fate immediately. That is the reality. When someone promises to enhance retirement benefits for people who are 75 or 80, they don't expect to see that increase when they're 87. What's more, Madam Speaker, I heard my colleagues on the other side of the House say, oh, it'll be beneficial for our seniors who have insufficient means. Wrong. What's going to happen is that the contributions are going to go up And people who are earning less, who are on a limited income, we're not going to benefit from this, Madam Speaker. And once again, that was an omission by the Liberal government. We need to read really behind what they're saying, read between the lines. That's what Canadians will have to learn at their expense over the next few weeks and months. Madam Speaker, don't worry though, we will be here. Our new critic for finance, the member for Louis Saint-Laurent, will be very present. He will be monitoring very closely what the government is doing. With this government that doesn't hesitate to impose new taxes on Canadians, businesses, that doesn't hesitate to run higher and higher deficits that are increasingly worrisome, and it doesn't even worry about them, the government, Madam Speaker. So enhancing the CPP will take money off Canadians' paychecks. Canadians are working hard, and maybe one day when they hit retirement, they might want to benefit from that. But the way things stand now, Madam Speaker, we need to be careful. We need to be wary of the nice promises made by that Liberal government, because I don't believe for a moment that the predictions that don't even hold for a week when we listen to them will yield the results in 2025. Something will happen. They talk about changes, adjustments. Why? Because they didn't count things right. Initially, calculate. They couldn't prepare accurate predictions in order to honor their promises. And Madam Speaker, above all, what's worrisome is that if the money isn't there, what are they going to do? They're going to go back to the good old federal method. Instead of just increasing a little bit, they're going to significantly increase it, and it's going to cost all of us a lot more. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I think there's an old saying that people use. It's we have to save for the future. It's like the ant and the grasshopper. And when I look at the savings rates across the world with pensions.
Report from 2013. In fact, Canada actually has some of the lowest contribution rates in the world. If you look at Austria, you see it's around 22.8% in 2012. In Estonia, it's 22.8% as well. In France, it's 16.7%. Even the United States has a contribution rate in 2012 of 10.4%. Mexico, really our only competitor in North America, actually has no contribution rate and essentially no pension plan or protection for their workers. And I really believe that we have to help our citizens in order to save for the future, because that is one of the things which is a principle that I think people who are old and young can both get behind. It's an old proverb, in fact, to look to the future, to believe in the present, but also to have that foresight and look to the future. It's also in the Bible with Joseph and the Pharaoh, saving for those lean times. So I hope the member can realize that, in fact, what we're trying to do is really make a better future for all Canadians and thinking a very, very long term for 7 generations. Thank you, Madam.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. Madam Speaker, now, if I understood correctly what my colleague is saying, it's give me your money, I'll do better than you will with it. That's what I think I understood. It's what he just said at any rate. And I think the opposite is true, Madam Speaker. Leave my money in my pockets, I'll be in a good position to use it and invest it the way I see fit. And I absolutely don't want to leave any more money for the Liberals, because what they've been doing with it for the past year has been of grave concern to me.
Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for his speech. But he's made reference to many people cannot save, or many people are being insulted because we're telling them how to save. So I guess my question is, a lot of times when the Conservatives were in power, they had time to make adjustments to the Canada Pension Plan because people were falling apart in that gap. So if they feel the Canada Pension Plan is not the answer, why didn't they eliminate it and why didn't they replace it with something else?
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. Madam Speaker, we worked on the GIS, which helped Canadians who were truly in need. And I salute the government. The Liberal government decided to increase the GIS in the last budget. because that was very necessary for seniors. They needed it. The Conservatives always took the best interest and the needs of Canadians to heart, whether they were young, working, or retired, Madam Speaker.
Comments, questions et commentaires. We have time for a brief question before question period. The honourable member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this government is making a number of policy choices that are intersecting and are going to create a huge, huge issue for our young adults in Canada. First of all, their decision around housing. Yeah, millennials will now have to save more to have a down payment for a house. They're going to have increase in terms of their CPP, and they're going to have to pay the cost of carbon tax on fuel. So I would like to ask my colleague is how, and then they're going to have a debt to pay off in 20 years that's going to be astronomical. So I'd like to ask my colleague what the impacts to our millennials and our young adults in the country is going to be in terms of this intersection of policy choices.
A brief answer from the member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Madam Speaker, I don't know, because it's such a huge issue and the deficit is so large, the deficit that the Liberals are going to be leaving for future generations. I'm very concerned for the future of my children and for the future of all Canadians, young Canadians, because we know that one day interest rates are going to go up, and that's when we're going to have to pay back the bill, pay this money back. It will be very large amounts, and it will cost a lot of jobs in Canada.
Déclaration de député, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Thank you, Madam Speaker. For a year now, I've had the honour of being the member for Laurentides-Labelle. Our region is full of beautiful landscapes, events, and tourist attractions in an area that covers 20,000 square kilometres. In other words, 40 times the size of the island of Montreal. We're renowned for our ski hills, our 9 regional and national parks, our controlled harvesting zones, our 2 wildlife reserves, thousands of lakes and rivers, and thousands of trails for biking, hiking, snowmobiling, and snowshoeing. But our region is mostly known for the quality of our people and our communities and the dynamic service of our tourism industry workers. Because this week is Small Business Week, I would like to highlight the work of everyone who works in our tourist industry, which, as Curé-Labelle said, is a little piece of Switzerland in Canada. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Madam Speaker, as I reflect on the first anniversary of my election as Member of Parliament for Edmonton Manning, I want to pay tribute to Paul Sitinsky. Before last year's vote, he tirelessly distributed campaign literature to rural areas of the riding, making sure everyone heard the message. Paul is an example of the countless volunteers who are the lifeblood of political campaigns and the backbone of democracy in our great nation. In every riding across the country, every campaign, every party, there are many Paul Sitinskys. There are the unsung heroes of political life. We in this House know how politics is a team effort, the work of dedicated Canadians who give of their time and talent for the good of the country. Let us salute volunteers like Paul Sitinsky. Thank you.
The honourable member for Honoré-Mercier. Madam Speaker, October is Latin American History and Heritage Month. Latin American history is rich in culture and traditions. It is as diverse as the many countries that make it up. It gave birth to many civilizations and peoples, including the Mosquitos, the Mapuches, the Incas, the Mayas, and the Aztecs. Then there was the Spanish conquest, the conquistadors, the wars of liberation, and the creation of independent states. Over decades, through highs and lows, the countries of Latin America developed. They developed their own identities, and they influenced the entire world with their music, salsa, merengue, rumba, and tango. They influenced literature with Jorge Luis Borges, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and Pablo Neruda. They influenced sport with Maradona, Pelé, and Lionel Messi. Madam Speaker, today more than ever, Latin America is a truly dynamic culture.
America Latina.
The honourable member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last Thursday, a tanker barge ran aground and sank near Bella Bella on BC's Central Coast, spilling tens of thousands of litres of toxic diesel into critical fishing areas of the Heiltsicht Nation. I rise to pay tribute to the courageous HoC who have been out on the water day and night since this tragic spill to protect their home. Local councillor Jesse Husty said, and I quote, "We know there are people who have had headaches, irritation in their noses and lungs since day one. They're not reporting them because they don't want to be told that they can't go out and help anymore. They can't imagine being anywhere else." The federal government didn't arrive on the scene for almost 24 hours after the spill, and since then a second spill response vessel has also run aground and now sunk. And diesel continues to leak, causing more devastation. This is not a world-class spill response. This is a betrayal and a dereliction of duty. The Prime Minister made a sacred promise to First Nations in British Columbia and the people in my riding that he would protect our coast. Yet when he was asked point blank earlier this week whether he would stay true to his word, he deflected and suggested that opening a Coast Guard station 600 kilometers away was good enough. We will protect what must be protected.
For Glengarry Prescott Russell.
Madam Speaker, I rise to recognize a brave and courageous young man, Jonathan Pitt, who suffers from a severe form of EB, a terrible disease that causes irritation and red blisters. Having this disease, according to doctors, is like being a burn victim your whole life. Madam Speaker, does this bring Jonathan down? Absolutely not. When asked by the Ottawa Citizen, Jonathan said, "Of course I'm not happy to have this, but at the same time, I kind of am because I prefer it being me than somebody else." At 16 years of age, he's already a noble man. But Madam Speaker, his selfless kindness doesn't stop there. He's an ambassador for Deborah Canada. Over the last month, Jonathan has been undergoing a stem cell transplant in Minnesota. It didn't work, but doctors are optimistic that the second stem cell transplant will work. Jonathan, you are an inspiration for all of us. Your community will walk for you on November 19th, and I know my colleagues will agree with me. We are all with you as you undergo your second treatment. Be strong, and we look forward to seeing you back in Russell. Thank you.
The honourable member for Whitby. The honourable member for Whitby.
Madame la Présidente, je prends...
Madam Speaker, I rise to speak today to mention the work of Wounded Warriors Canada in my riding of Whitby. All across the country, we recognize their service to veterans, to armed forces workers, and to wounded first aid workers. Wounded Warriors organized a run, or rather a bike, with more than 200 cyclists.
Ill and injured veterans. Many of us participated in the 22 Push-Up Challenge, which raised funds and awareness for wounded warriors. On behalf of the organization and the people it serves, thank you and happy anniversary to Phil Ralph.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Almost a year ago, I was welcomed in Ottawa by a fantastic team who allowed me and my colleagues to devote ourselves 100% to our duties as MPs. I'm talking about the Sergeant-at-Arms and his team, the constables who remember all of our faces, the RCMP agents who are always there to protect us, the researchers and analysts who always give us all the facts, the parliamentary guides who know the history of this place, the interpreters who allow my Anglophone colleagues to understand my excellent speeches, and all of the people who work for the standing committees and parliamentary associations, as well as all of those who serve us food every day in the cafeteria and restaurant, the shuttle drivers who always have a smile, the clerk of the House and his team, and all the others who work in the shadows. And finally, the pages who are always there to help us with the slightest task. How many young people do you know who dream of listening to MPs speechifying for hours on end? With such a fantastic team, it's easy to be brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for your support. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Madam Speaker, last Sunday was the 36th anniversary of World Food Day. I'd like to take this opportunity to raise awareness about poverty and hunger. Too many people suffer from malnutrition or have an insufficient calorie intake. In Canada, 1 child out of every 6 children suffers from food insecurity. With the Canada Child Benefit, Budget 2016 helped lift 300,000 children out of poverty. This is a step in the right direction, along with many other measures put forward by other stakeholders. For example, there are community organizations like Complexe Le Partage de la Prairie, which are helping alleviate food insecurity for millions of people. In the coming months, Madam Speaker, I will be working with my colleague, the Minister of Agriculture, and a series of other stakeholders to develop a totally new food policy, which will help more Canadian families put healthier, more high-quality food on the table. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Peace River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Carbon tax man, let us be. We can't afford this onerous fee. 11 cents more for a litre of fuel, taxing me and my kids' school. Farms and families will feel the pinch when the carbon tax man pulls the cinch. Tax the tractor, combine, plow, tax the chicken, egg, and cow. Tax the fuel that heats the barn, tax the power that runs the farm. Add it up, Liberals, you'll like the stash when the carbon tax man grabs our cash.
Right.
Tax the Kenworth logging trucks, tax the chainsaw tops and butts. Tax the backbone of industry and watch our companies become history. The Liberals want to take it all, the carbon tax man will have a ball. Thousands of dollars from you and me, shipping costs on clothes and tea. Earning a wage is not so fab when it's taken away in a massive tax grab. Carbon tax man, enough's enough. Don't tax Canadians and all their stuff.
The honourable member for Ottawa West, Nepean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. During World War II, Canada provided refuge to the Dutch royal family. When Princess Juliana gave birth to her daughter Marguerite, the maternity ward of the Ottawa Civic Hospital was even briefly declared international territory. Every year since then, the Dutch have gifted our capital with tulips, which now hold a special place in the Canadian imagination. Pour souligner le
To mark Canada's 150th anniversary, the Canadian Garden Council is giving red and white tulip bulbs to 150 gardens across the country, including the Embassy West Senior Centre in my riding. I would like to thank the Council for helping ensure that this moment of exceptional humanity in Canada's history will be celebrated as part of our 150th anniversary celebrations.
Feliciteerd.
The honourable member for Oakville.
Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to recognize the 150th anniversary of military service of the Lawrence Scots Regiment. We celebrated them in my riding of Oakville with the unveiling of a monument recognizing their battle honours and regimental insignia. From fighting on the Queenston Heights in Niagara to most recently the International Security Assistance Force in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, the Lawrence Scots have recruited, trained and generated soldiers for every theatre of war in which Canada has engaged. The regiment has also supported Canada's numerous contributions to international peace and security through the UN and NATO. As we commemorate the 150th regimental anniversary, I ask the House to honour the brave young men and women of the Lawrence Scots Regiment who have so selflessly dedicated themselves, and lest we forget the many who have paid the ultimate sacrifice in their service to Canada. May the Lawrence Scots long continue. Er sana duschas.
The honourable member for Foothills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in the House to pay tribute to an inspiring Albertan and a close friend, Sheldon Kennedy, who received Alberta's highest award, the Order of Excellence, on Wednesday. Sheldon showed incredible courage to break a long-standing silence in sports with his story of childhood sexual abuse, and now he's a tireless advocate for other victims. He suffered for many years under the burden of this secret, and a secret he was afraid to share. When he did share his personal story, many other victims, inspired by Sheldon's strength, came forward, and their stories inspired Sheldon to take action. He established Respect Group to help prevent abuse, bullying, harassment in sports, school, and the workplace. In 2013, the renowned Sheldon Kennedy Child Advocacy Centre opened in Calgary to help those affected by abuse. Madam Speaker, I am proud to know this compassionate, inspiring man who speaks around the world raising awareness about sexual abuse and the impact on victims, and I am proudly honoured to call him a friend. I invite all members in this House to congratulate Sheldon on his award and thank him for his advocacy.
The honourable member for Ottawa South.
Madam Speaker, 2 years ago, a few hundred meters from here, a mother lost a son lost a father, and an entire nation mourned the loss of a dedicated soldier. On October 22, 2014, Corporal Nathan Cirillo stood guard at the monument to the brave women and men who came before him, to those who made the ultimate sacrifice to protect our freedom. Le Caporal Cirillo était l'un des...
Corporal Cirillo was a beautiful example of what the Canadian Armed Forces can represent. He was full of humility, and he served a nation that is appreciative of his actions.
Of those that choose to watch over us, thankful for their sacrifice, and resolute in our commitment to continue fighting for a world free of fear, of injustice, and oppression. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Speaker, for 21 years, the Community Action Program for Children has supported local initiatives to help at-risk children and their families. In Victoria, this federal funding allows community centres to offer children's activities for free and helps parents access services and support. Often these families are low income, they're single parents, new immigrants, or have Indigenous ancestry. All of them want to build a better, healthier life for their children. But with funding flat for a decade and the need constantly rising, programs are falling behind. Kids in Victoria are literally being turned away at the door. I would like to impress upon this House the tremendous value that federal CAPC funding brings to all our communities. I hope we can work together to strengthen it for the parents and kids who count on it.
The honourable member for Barrie-Innisfil.
Madam Speaker, yesterday marked the second anniversary of Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent's murder by an Islamic extremist in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. And it will be 2 years ago tomorrow that Corporal Nathan Cirillo was killed as he stood guard at the National War Memorial here in Ottawa. On the anniversary of these tragic events, I pay tribute to these two brave men for their sacrifice, and I extend my sincere gratitude to their families. Last year, the Conservative government initiated a large ceremony at the National War Memorial to mark the first anniversary of the attack. The event included a speech by the Governor-General, a military march past by Cirillo's Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, a CF-18 flypast in missing man formation to honour Warrant Officer Vincent, and the unveiling of a permanent plaque commemorating Cirillo at the site. They were remembered, Madam Speaker, yet this year there's no commemoration, no event, and no honour is being paid to these fallen heroes by the government. I think I can safely say on behalf of all veterans and all Canadians, Madam Speaker, to say that we are deeply saddened by this.
Questions orales, oral question. Oh, sorry, I forgot. There's one more. The honourable member for Hall-Elmer, l'honorable député.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the support of 71 other UN countries, Canada spearheaded diplomatic pressure on the UN Security Council to break their inaction in dealing with the Syria crisis. Canada stepped up when leadership was needed. But what laid the groundwork? Ce qui a produit cette action, Madame la Présidente.
What laid the groundwork for this, Madam Speaker, was the incredible work of Canada's ambassador to the UN, Marc-André Blanchard. He managed to rally these countries toward a common cause.
Madam Speaker, we get a window into the world occupied by our tireless diplomats and civil servants. Every day, Canada and Canadians are representing our interests, take a stand for our principles and for what is right. They assert our voice at critical global tables and fora to make a difference. All Canadians and every member in this House, I'm certain, will join me in thanking our tireless work from our civil servants and our diplomats in making sure that Canada has its place.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Trade agreement is a historic agreement. It took years to negotiate, and it was the Conservatives who got the hard part done. We negotiated a deal that will benefit Canadian families and businesses in every sector of the country. Now the Liberal government is struggling with what should be the easy part, putting a final signature on the deal we delivered. When will the Prime Minister pick up the drop ball from his Trade Minister and get the job done for Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank the Honourable Member for her question. I would remind her that this deal was dead when we took over office, and it's only because of the progressive elements that we added to the agreement, Mr. Speaker, that we have come this far. We have worked hard to respond to the concerns expressed by European member states, but we're disappointed, Madam Speaker. The Minister's personally disappointed. I'm disappointed after all that hard work that the Europeans have been unable to make a decision. Even though we share similar values, even though we have been extremely patient, even though we've been flexible, there is no agreement yet on the table.
Honourable House Leader of the Official Opposition.
It's a failure on the part of the Liberal government, and they're going to wear it. Mr. Speaker, while the Finance Minister provides special cash-for-access treatment for his elite Liberal friends, ordinary Canadians are worried. Now more than ever, Canadians are concerned about how they will maintain their own family's budget. Yet the Finance Minister is planning to blow past his targets and add billions more to the deficit, a deficit that will have to be paid for by Canadians. When will the Liberals get control of their reckless spending and stop damaging our economy?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we were so pleased recently to host the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, who said that she hopes that our policies go viral around the world. And the reason for that, Madam Speaker, is because she understands that making fiscal investments in the long-term future of our country is absolutely the right thing to do in a time of low growth. That's what we're going to do to make our economy better for the long term, for Canadian families, for all those people who need to have growth, for their families to have opportunities in the future.
The Honourable House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, the Minister can keep on with that fantasy, but it's not working. In fact, out-of-control Liberal spending, a slipping Canadian economy, and a downgraded Bank of Canada forecast could add billions to the federal deficit. What's the Liberal solution? More taxes on Canadians. Whether it's the payroll tax grab, a carbon tax, or increased taxes on small businesses, the only plan the Liberals seem to have is to punish Canadians with more taxes. When will the Liberals stop helping themselves and start helping Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I guess I'd like to start by just quoting the April Monetary Policy Report, which said, measures in Budget 2016 will have a notable positive impact in 2016. So what we're talking about, Madam Speaker, is how we can actually deal with the low-growth environment that's been around for a decade, around for the decade that the previous government was sitting in office. We're taking action to actually make a long-term difference for Canadians. We are doing the things that people expect us to do so their children and grandchildren will have a better Canada.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Athabasca. Madam Speaker, today our thoughts are with the families that are affected by the 7,000 families that are affected by the layoffs. At about the 2,000 of those families are in Canada. For a year, the Liberals have been talking about spending, and they are creating a huge deficit on the backs of our children. Can the government not invest to create jobs? When will they produce a plan to create wealth?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, this is exactly what we have done. We decided to have a plan to drive economic growth in our country, and that was in part of the budget in 2016. It was the priority. We have to make up for what wasn't done over the past decade. We've made investments for the middle class, for our children and grandchildren. This is exactly what we are doing. Honourable Member for Richmond, Athabasca. Well, the ministers talking about this, but there are two major banking institutions that are asking for these deficit measures to stop. When it comes to Bombardier, there have been requests, but the Liberals early on put an end to the plans for the Billy Bishop Airport that would have helped Bombardier. The fact is that there is no plan for the economy, for economic growth, or for job creation. Does the Minister of Finance not realize that this is a dead-end policy and it will not create jobs? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Madam Speaker, it is absolutely the case that we understand it is important to have good jobs for Canadians. This is a very key goal for our government, and this is exactly why we decided the measures that were proposed by the former government did not go far enough. We've decided to invest in the future, in infrastructure, for example, in an economy that will be more innovative. And this will create more jobs for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. We learned this morning that Bombardier was going to cut 7,500 jobs, including 1,500 in Quebec, and that comes on top of the restructuring that was already announced earlier this year. The government promised to invest in this pillar of the Quebec economy, but the help has not been forthcoming. The government has has abandoned the Avios employees and must not do the same thing for Bombardier. When will it act?
Science and economic development.
Madam Speaker, first and foremost, our thoughts go out to the workers and their families during this difficult time. We as a government understand the challenges that they're going through. With respects to Bombardier, we've been very clear, we've been very engaged with this company, and we understand the importance of this company in the aerospace sector. And we've said very clearly it's not a matter of if, but how we want to make this investment. And I spoke with the CEO and president last night, Alain. He made it very clear as well that these restructuring job losses are independent, have nothing to do with the growth discussions we're having with respect to the billion-dollar request that they made.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
2,000, Madam Speaker. That's the number of Canadians that are about to lose their job because of this government's inaction. Workers at Bombardier have been waiting a long time for this government to make good on its investment promise. And what have they actually received to date? Nothing. Companies around the world are global giants today because their home governments invest in them. Does this government understand that, and will they finally deliver their investment promise needed to keep good-paying jobs at Bombardier here in Canada?
Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development.
Madam Speaker, I think the member opposite should recall the announcement that we made last week. We committed $54 million to Bombardier and its suppliers to further invest in research and development. So we are committed to the aerospace sector. We made investments in Mirabel as well. We're committed to this sector because it's so critical for our economy. It contributes $28 billion of economic activity, employs over 200,000 employees. And we made it very, very clear this is a serious request that we take very importantly, and we're going to find a solution, but we want to make sure it's the right solution for taxpayers to make sure we get a right return on investment.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
So more words, less action, less jobs. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister's ethics rules were very clear. I want to quote, "There should be no preferential access to government or the appearance of preferential access for political donors." But now it's clear those were just empty words. Ministers don't follow them, and the Prime Minister won't enforce them. So the question is simple. Will this government turn that empty promise of good intentions into actual rules that are enforced?
Very good.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's important to note all members of Parliament and all parties fundraise, and we all abide by the exact same rules that were put in place by the previous government. Events like these are one part of every party's fundraising and engagement work. Federal politics is subject to some of the strictest political financing legislation and regulations in the country, and the party fully complies with the Elections Act in all cases, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister already also wrote that ministers have an obligation to perform their official duties and arrange their private affairs in a manner that will bear the closest public scrutiny. And he also said that the obligation is not fully discharged merely by acting within the law. The rules seem very clear. The Minister of Finance says that he was acting within the law. Why is the Prime Minister refusing to enforce his own rules with his cabinet?
And House Leader.
Madam Speaker, if it's the same question, you will get the same answer. And the same answer is, quite frankly, all members of Parliament and all parties fundraise. We know that, Madam Speaker. And we all abide by the same rules, Madam Speaker. Rules that were put in place by the previous Harper government, Madam Speaker. The party is in full compliance with the Elections Act. The member knows that, Madam Speaker.
The
Honourable Member for Carleton.
The Liberal budget admitted the deficit would be more than twice what they promised during the election. Now the Finance Minister says it will be bigger still because economic growth is down. But wait, weren't we told that big deficits would solve that problem? Madam Speaker, if deficits created growth, our economy would be roaring right now. Instead, it's stalled. When will the Finance Minister realize that spending money we don't have is not the solution, it's the problem?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, we came into office with stalled growth from the previous government. That was exactly what we faced and what Canadians decided was a problem, and that's why they agreed with us that the right way to address this is to make significant investments in Canadians today and tomorrow. So the kinds of measures we put in place, the Canada Child Benefit, those measures are having an impact now. They're starting to be put into the economy. The infrastructure investments that we put in place, they're starting to come into the economy now. We know that we are going to make a long-term difference from Canadians by taking the right decisions for their future.
Well, member for Carleton.
Well, the Prime Minister has unveiled his plan for creating jobs in Beverly Hills and Hollywood. He put the premiers in charge of implementing his new $39 billion carbon tax. Kathleen Wynne plans to spend $300 million of it buying carbon credits from California. So the middle class and those working to join it will pay more in food, fuel, and everything else to send a pot of gold to the Golden State. Why are the Liberals forcing Ontarians and Canadians to pay for their California dreaming?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. We are the only party that seems to understand the environment and the economy go together. That's right. We are committed to taking serious action on climate change. We were very proud 2 weeks ago that we were able to ratify the Paris Agreement. Unfortunately, the party opposite did not support that. We are working with the provinces and territories to have a plan, a pan-Canadian plan that will make a real difference, that will create good jobs and will build a clean economy for future generations, for my children, for your children, and for our grandchildren.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Confederation.
Madam Speaker, it is no secret the Alberta economy is suffering. Albertans are suffering. There is growing frustration. The Liberals have given up even trying to help. The evidence is clear. It has been 1 year since the Liberals promised sunny ways. In that time, Calgary's unemployment rate has grown by 36%, higher than the national average. The Liberals keep hiking taxes and making things worse. Madam Speaker, why are the Liberals kicking Calgarians when they're already down?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, we take very seriously the challenges facing people in Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador. We know that resource prices are hitting that province hard. We have made a number of decisions that are making a difference for people in Alberta and across the country. Tax decreases that are helping them. Canada Child Benefit, which helps 9 out of 10 families with more money in their pockets. And changes to our employment insurance system that make a difference in softening the landing. On the long term, we are making investments that are going to help to grow our economy and grow the economy of Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Service Moose Mountain.
Madam Speaker, this week is Small Business Week in Canada. One small business in my riding, which services oil rigs, contributes $340,000 yearly to the local economy in fuel. With the their fleet of 20 trucks and the Liberal carbon tax, this business will pay an additional $29,000 annually to fuel alone. The carbon tax is roughly the cost of employing 1 to 2 shop hands, or 1 mechanic, or 1 laborer. Why are the Liberals forcing a carbon tax that will hurt the struggling oil economy and oil and gas industry even further?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of
Thank my
Small
honourable
Business.
colleague for the question, and while our hearts go out to those in the oil fields, I'd like to make one point that this government does understand small business. We made a huge investment in Destination Canada this year, because small business operators tell us that they want customers. And I'm pleased to report that Destination Canada says that tourism is up by 10%, over 10% for June, July, and August. It's the best summer we've had since 2002. Small business operators wanted more customers, and that's what we've given them, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Yeah, well, raising taxes on small business isn't going to help them. Madam Speaker, the Liberals promised their $10 billion deficit would go towards infrastructure spending to create jobs. But 110,000 Canadians have lost their jobs across the country, and this Liberal deficit continues to grow. Meanwhile, there seems to be a new tax every day. The Liberals hiked taxes on small business, and they continue to hike taxes on everyday Canadians. When will the millionaire finance minister stop his war on the middle class?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, we know that providing jobs for middle-class Canadians, providing opportunities for those who want to get in the middle class, these are critical issues that Canadians are worried about. And that is exactly why we did the opposite of what the member said. We lowered taxes on middle-class Canadians because we know that they want to see the benefits from our economy for them. We know that the Canada Child Benefit helps all Canadians with children, 9 out of 10 families, with $2,300 on average more. This is important for middle-class Canadians and will make a real difference.
The Honourable Member for Lambton-Kent, Middlesex.
Madam Speaker, for 197 years, the Arva Flour Mill has a perfect safety record. This week is Small Business Week, but this small business won't have anything to celebrate if the Labour Minister doesn't grant an exemption from the Federal Labour Code. It's been months since I've asked the Minister for action, and still no contact with the mill from her or her office. Is it the plan of the Minister to let the small mill die a slow death? The Minister has the authority to exempt it. Will the Minister do her job and keep...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment, Workforce and Development.
Madam Speaker, as the member well knows, the Canada Labour Code requires employers to implement preventative measures to ensure employees are not exposed to conditions. A danger directive was issued back in May to Avra Flour. The Labour Program's health and safety officers are working with the employer to ensure compliance with the code. It would be inappropriate for myself or the Minister to speak any more about the matter.
Member for London Fanshawe.
Madam Speaker, the Liberals are once again supporting Conservative policies in our courts. First, they took veterans to court regarding promised pensions, and now this government is denying expat Canadians the right to vote. Something, I might add, just like pensions for veterans, they promised to change. Madam Speaker, when will the Liberals keep their promises and stop recycling tired Conservative policies, the same policies they campaigned against only a year ago?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, it is a great privilege to be here on this traditional Algonquin territory. As a government, we are firmly committed to enhancing Canadians' participation in our democratic institutions, and we believe that more Canadians ought to be able to vote. We are currently examining the law as it relates to long-term non-resident Canadians who wish to vote in federal elections. We intend to introduce legislation this year that will meet the needs of highly mobile Canadian citizens who live in today's increasingly interconnected world.
Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, in the last campaign, just a year ago, Liberals promised to stop the terrible Conservative plan to strip Canadians overseas of their sacred right to vote. But yesterday, in court, we learned the Liberals are actually continuing the Conservatives' fight at the Supreme Court of Canada against Canadians living abroad. And the Liberal Party had the audacity to hit these very same Canadians up for a donation during the campaign. Someone once said a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, and I agree. So why would the Liberals take up Stephen Harper's scheme to rob 1.5 million Canadians of their right to vote?
Honourable Minister of Democratic Reform.
Madam Speaker, it's always great when the member opposite and I agree. The 1.2 million Canadians who live abroad and who wish to be part of our democratic institutions and participate in the voting process, we've heard them. As I mentioned, we are currently examining legislation to find ways to allow individuals who live abroad in this highly globalized world to be part of our elections, and look forward to working with the member opposite since we agree to that end.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister of Finance recently attended a Cash for Access fundraiser. The Liberal House Leader has repeated ad nauseum that this was within the rules. But the Prime Minister's document, Open and Accountable Government, says ministers, quote, have an obligation to perform their official duties and arrange their private affairs in a manner that will bear the closest public scrutiny. This obligation is not fully discharged merely by acting within the law. So when will the Prime Minister start enforcing his own code of ethics?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Honourable House Leader, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And if I may, just to repeat, all members of Parliament and all parties fundraise. And we all abide by the exact same rules. Rules that were put in place by the previous Harper government. Madam Speaker, events like these are one part of every party's fundraising and engagement work. Federal politics is subject to some of the strictest political financing legislation and regulations in the country, and the party fully complies with the Elections Act in all cases, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, give him another chance. Both the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister held Cash for Access fundraisers in obvious violation of the Prime Minister's Code of Ethics. They claim that they're complying with the Ethics Commissioner, yet the Commissioner told the Globe and Mail that she can't tell whether the rules were breached because the Prime Minister gave that power to the Privy Council Office. Well, who does the Privy Council Office answer to? Guess who? The Prime Minister. Is this what he calls open and accountable government? When will the Prime Minister actually start being transparent with Canadians?
The Honourable House Leader of the Government.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. All members of Parliament and all parties fundraise, and we all abide by the exact same rules. Rules that were put in place by the previous government, rules that many members sitting on the side of the House, the other side of the House, use to fundraise for the Conservative Party. I'd like to remind the members opposite that on July the 9th of this year, just 3 short months ago, the Leader of the Opposition, along with the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, held a barbecue fundraiser in Calgary, and they charged a whopping $2,000 per table. I don't know about you, Madam Speaker, but I've never been to a barbecue where you have to buy a table. Clearly, Madam Speaker,
the honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That was a constituency association event, and Madam Speaker, it looks like the Prime Minister is picking up right where Kathleen Wynne left off. This should be no surprise to anyone, considering Jerry Butts created the Liberal Cash for Access fundraising scheme in Ontario. The Prime Minister himself instructed ministers that there shall be no preferential access to government in exchange for partisan political donations from the Liberal elites. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to keep his word. Why can't the Prime Minister and his ministers see that using their government positions to line the pockets of their party...
Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, again, I'd like to be able to remind members opposite that on July the 9th of this year, just 3 short months ago, the Leader of the Opposition, along with the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, held a barbecue fundraiser in Calgary, and they charged a whopping $2,000 a table, Madam Speaker. We all understand that rules that many members sitting on that side of the House...
Order! I just want to remind members, when someone has the floor, that we give them the respect that he deserves, and that, as you know, that is in the orders. Order. That's right, somebody might lose a question, so I just want to give the member a chance to finish.
Madam Speaker, it's important that we realize all members of Parliament and all party fundraise, and we all abide by the exact same rules as demonstrated by the Leader of the Opposition.
The honourable member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Madam Speaker, We know well that the Liberals have a fairly elastic ethics now. They spent 10 years in purgatory, but they learned absolutely nothing. We learned that the Minister of Finance sold access to rich people at a cost of $1,500 a person. Will the government be transparent? Will the minister tell us who was there, please? The Honourable Minister for Fisheries and Oceans. Madam Speaker, we don't really understand what the Conservatives are trying to teach us about fundraising. The former member for Labrador had to resign over a fundraising scandal. And we know that the parliamentary secretary to the assistant to the Prime Minister had to resign over these types of scandals, so there is no justification to their criticism.
Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Canada needs a national action plan on abandoned vessels. They pose terrible risks to our economy and our environment. But this government's ship-by-ship approach is too slow and too expensive. At the rate we're moving, it'll take a century to clean up the 600 abandoned vessels littering Canada's coast. BC's had dozens of motions of good intention. Do we really need another? When will this government deal with a clear action plan and table it in this House to once and for all deal with abandoned vessels in Canada?
Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for the question. We share her concern about these derelict and abandoned vessels that are, frankly, on every coast of the country and including in some of the lakes. It is a problem that our government has committed to rectify, and the Minister of Transport and I have been working with a number of stakeholders, and I know that she's excited about the plan that we'll be tabling. And the good news, Madam Speaker, for all members of the House is that plan is coming very, very soon.
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Madam Speaker, last week a tanker barge ran aground off BC's north coast, spilling 200,000 litres of toxic fuel into a sensitive area. After a slow response, one of the ships helping with the cleanup also began to sink. And this is what the minister calls a world-class response? This relatively minor incident still caused major damage. If it had been a fully loaded supertanker, the devastation would have been off the charts. So when will this government finally implement a permanent ban off BC's north coast?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government remains committed to improving marine safety in Canada and ensuring the protection of our marine environment. The Nathan E. Stewart incident underlines the need for changes in these incidents, and that is why the Minister is currently working on a coastal strategy to enhance marine safety in a meaningful way. He has named a Minister's Observer to support the Transportation Safety Board's investigation, and transport officials have initiated a compliance inspection. We will take the necessary action on the findings to enhance marine safety in Canada.
The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
Madam Speaker, on June 17th, the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development tabled a unanimous report with recommendations on the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy and accompanying legislation. That this report received unanimous support from all three parties is a testament to Canadians' desire to take the necessary steps to create a more sustainable future. Earlier this month, our government tabled our first Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. Madam Speaker, can the Minister of Environment advise this House as to the progress our government has made on updating the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
I'd like to thank the member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington for his great question. Our government is committed to protecting the environment and working towards a clean growth strategy that benefits the middle class and creates good jobs. Canadians want ambitious action on climate change. They want more leadership from government. They strongly support sustainable development and are motivated to make a difference. I want to thank the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development for the hard work and all the input that we received from Canadians across the country. This federal sustainable development strategy will make a real difference to building a more sustainable world for our children and grandchildren.
Honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Madam Speaker, for years, Canadian police officers have worked hard and served with distinction on the Federal Judicial Advisory Committee. Now, what an insult now that for no reason the Liberal government has terminated their membership on this committee. I want to know, why would the Prime Minister show such disrespect for those who risk their lives every day to serve and protect Canadians? I'd like to know that.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the question, and it gives me the opportunity to highlight the 24 judicial appointments that we made across the country yesterday, and to highlight the renewed process to ensure openness and transparency with respect to the new appointments process. We have reconstituted the judicial advisory committees with the intent to ensure that there is diversity among the members of the committees, but to ultimately ensure that we achieve diversity on the benches across this country to reflect Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Madam Speaker, police officers in Canada have worked hard and served well on the Judicial Advisory Committee. It's an insult that their participation has been terminated. Madam Speaker, why is the Minister of Justice showing such disrespect for the people who risk their lives day in and day out to serve and protect Canadians? Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and certainly there is no disrespect being shown to law enforcement officers who risk their lives every day to protect our safety. What we have done is institute an open and transparent process for judicial appointments and unprecedentedly put online application forms wherein anybody can apply to be on the Judicial Advisories Committee. I look forward to, as the Minister of Justice, being able to nominate 3 members of that committee as we seek to ensure that we have broad-based diversity on the committees, as well as future appointments for Superior Court judges.
The Honourable Member for York Simcoe.
October 22nd marks 2 years since a jihadist terrorist struck at the heart of our freedom and democracy. Corporal Nathan Cirillo was brutally gunned down just steps from here. The thickness of a door and brave actions of our Hill security staff saved members here a similar fate. It was 2 days after a jihadist murdered Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent. Last year, our government honoured the sacrifice of these men, but this year, the Liberals want Canadians to forget. There will be no memorial. Why are the Liberals dishonouring these fallen men and trying to pretend that these jihadist attacks never happened?
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defence.
All of Canada remembers the tragic events on October 20th and 22nd of 2014. We mourn the passing of Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent and Corporal Nathan Cirillo and extend our sympathies to their families. It is events in Ottawa on November 11th and others across Canada and the world where we will join together as a nation and as a people to recognize and pay tribute to all those brave Canadian soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice in wartime and in peace, at home and abroad, to safeguard our values and our way of life. We will remember.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Madam Speaker, on October 22, 2014, a jihadist terrorist struck at the heart of our liberty, our democracy. Corporal Nathan Cirillo was brutally gunned down just a few steps from here. The incident took place just 2 days after the assassination of Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent. Last year, the government honoured the sacrifice of these men, but this year the Liberals want Canadians to forget. There will not be a commemorative ceremony. Madam Speaker, why are the Liberals dishonouring these fallen men and trying to pretend that these jihadist attacks never happened? The Honourable Minister.
We respect the tremendous sacrifices that occurred with Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent and Corporal Nathan Cirillo, and they paid the ultimate sacrifice for our nation. It is events in Ottawa on November 11th and throughout the world where we pay tribute to those who have paid that ultimate sacrifice, to our Canadian Armed Force members and others who serve and secure this country daily. We will honour them, we will respect them, we understand their tremendous sacrifice of them and their families, and we will respect them going forward.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi Bay James Nunavik. Madam Speaker, the situation in Muskrat Falls is escalating. In fact, the Nunatsiavut government is calling on the Prime Minister to immediately modify authorizations under the Fisheries Act to protect water and Aboriginal fishing zones. The government has stated that there is no relationship more important than one with First Nations, and I think it's time to take action, Madam Speaker. Will the government respect this simple ask from the government of Nunavut and protect these waters? Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague opposite for his question. We acknowledge that the government of Newfoundland and Labrador is working with Aboriginal peoples on this project. We want responsibilities to be respected to ensure that Aboriginal rights are protected. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Madam Speaker, after several missed opportunities, the government has an excellent opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. For decades, Quebecers and Canadians and people in my riding have been impatiently waiting for a dedicated passenger rail corridor, the Quebec-Windsor corridor. The Via Rail project calls for exactly that, and greenhouse gases would be reduced at the same time. Will the government respond to Via Rail's request and finally bring Canada into the 21st century? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government is developing the best approach to delivering a safe, efficient and reliable passenger rail service in Canada. And as such, the Minister of Transport is working with VIA in the coming months to fully assess our options. And that is why in Budget 2016 we allocated $45 million to various VIA Rail projects, including $34.4 million for the improvements of stations and maintenance centres, as well as $3.3 million over 3 years to support an in-depth assessment of VIA Rail's high-frequency rail proposal. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Madam Speaker, this government's paternal approach and top-down approach to financial transparency for First Nations must come to an end. They're not enforcing the Financial Transparency Act, they are breaking the law. The minister told the House on Monday that if band members want to know how their chief and council are spending the money, they just have to ask her office. Why are the Liberals forcing band members to go to a government department to receive information that should be readily available in the community?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her question. As you know, accountability and transparency are key to our government and vital to ensuring that the delivery of investments in Indigenous and Northern communities through our Budget 2016. We're engaging with First Nations, as the Minister has said on many occasions, on a way forward on transparency and accountability. First Nations continue their long-standing practice of reporting on their financial and program performances, both to their members and to the department. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Madam Speaker, I think there's a reality check that's needed here. An audit of Alexander's First Nations identified $2.1 million in unexplained payments. As the former CFO said, you take those concerns to Indian Affairs. Indian Affairs says you have to go back to the Chief and Council. You bring it to the Chief and Council, and it gets swept under the rug. You go to the RCMP, they say you have to have proof, so they spin our people around. When will the Minister ensure that band members have access to basic financial information that all other Canadians enjoy?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everyone, including First Nations governments, want to ensure there's increased transparency and accountability. But we're going to achieve this by working in partnership with First Nations, not a top-down approach that's made in Ottawa. But what I will say is that we take the allegations of misuse of public funds very seriously. And when necessary, INAC conducts forensic audits to ensure that the funds are used for the intended manner. We treat the allegations of misused funds very seriously, and we will be following through to ensure that funds are invested properly.
For Foothills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was surprised on Monday that the Minister of Indigenous Affairs and Indigenous and Northern Affairs said that she was committed to transparency and was willing to provide, and I quote, financial statements at any time. I was surprised by this because this is absolutely not the experience of local Alberta First Nations. So far, they have been ignored. On behalf of the Kainai Reserve, I have asked many times for the KPMG audit, which was completed last year, only to be stonewalled. When will this minister provide the Kainai Reserve with the financial audit, and what are they trying to hide?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the minister was very clear when she spoke to this issue a few days ago in the House of Commons. Financial transparency is important to us. Accountability is important to us. We know that changes have to be made in how that relationship works with First Nations. But again, it will not be a top-down approach from our government. It will be in working with the First Nations to get the process that will work best for everyone. In terms of the information, the minister has said it is available through her department. That remains the same. And I would ask those that are looking to approach.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Longueuil, Charles Lemoine. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The situation is disastrous. We've all seen the pictures and the reports. Yesterday, the Minister of Foreign Affairs participated in a plenary session at the UN General Assembly initiated by Canada. Could he update this House on the discussions? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member. Yesterday, Canada mobilized the world through an exceptional procedure. It was a plenary meeting of the UN on this crisis. The international community spoke clearly. We need an end to hostilities and humanitarian assistance emergently, and this has been required since July. Assad, supported by Russia, must hear the message, stop the bombings, and allow humanitarian assistance to get through. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, a year after the election of the Liberal government, 3 years after the Lake Megantic tragedy, every night the people of Lake Megantic are jarred from their sleep by trains going right through their downtown core. The Standing Committee on Transport, the Leader of the Official Opposition, all people in the House, Union of Municipalities in Quebec, everybody agrees with the idea of a bypass for Lake Megantic. Madam Speaker, the minister said he was eager to hear the results of a study, a feasibility study on this, and people in Lake Megantic are even more eager to hear. What's the minister waiting for to take some action?
Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as I mentioned, our thoughts continue to be with the families of the victims of the tragic events of July 2013. And our government is committed to improving rail safety. And in Budget 2016, we invested $143 million to improve rail safety and the transportation of dangerous goods. The members should note that the final results from the city-led study have not been released, and we are still awaiting the technical details. Therefore, the minister would like to see the results before rendering a final decision, but we are conscious that the citizens of Lac Megantic would like...
The honourable member for Kitchener.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this government believes that all Canadians deserve access to housing that meets their needs and that they can afford. With Budget 2016, this government has shown its will to renew Canada's leadership on housing. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development tell us how we are involved in this file internationally?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my hard-working colleague from Kitchener Centre for his excellent question. And I'm pleased to report the Minister of Social Development is leading the Canadian delegation in Quito, Ecuador, for the United Nations Habitat 3. We are there to ensure the new urban agenda is people-centric, respects diversity, and values the inclusion of unrepresented groups. Canada's new approach to housing is being applauded around the world, and we are so proud to be part of the international community at UN Habitat 3. Canada is back, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A disabled veteran contacted the Minister of Transport concerned about a rail crossing yards away from his home. Water floods the ditches, saturating the tracks during heavy rains. CN has said this is absolutely a safety concern as the tracks could shift and derail a train carrying oil through that city. The minister's response? Contact your local MP. Seriously? When did he put me in charge of monitoring rail safety?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And our government recognizes the importance of ensuring the safety of our rail transportation system. And as such, we are investing $143 million in Budget 2016 to improve rail safety and the transportation of dangerous goods. There are positive developments in the mandate to enhance rail safety, and we will continue to improve rail safety. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
L'honorable député de la Pointe.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. Madam Speaker, the Ethics Commissioner denounced those evening fundraising events costing $1,500 a plate. It gives people the impression that the government is for sale to the highest bidder, especially when it's the Minister of Finance. To restore public funding for political parties and to limit donations, they need to do what Quebec has done. When will the government put an end to these risks of cronyism and brown envelopes?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All members of Parliament and all parties fundraise, and we will abide by the exact same rules. Rules that were put in place by, in fact, the previous government. Rules that many members sitting on that side of the House used to fundraise for the Conservative Party, for example. I'd like to remind the members opposite, on May 19, 2015, former Finance Minister Joe Oliver held a fundraising at an elite private Albany club in Toronto. A special event with the Honourable Joe Oliver, PC MP, is how they advertise it, and they charge $500 a head. The point is, Madam Speaker, we are following the law of Elections Canada.
The
Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, in Quebec, the separation of the state and church is a consensus, but not here. This week, the Caliph Muhammad came in and the non-Muslim liberals wore the veil. We had a call to prayer in Centre Block. In Quebec, it is a secular place, not here. We call for the separation of state and church, and please affirm once and for all the secular nature of all institutions, starting with this Parliament. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, our government wants to defend the rights and freedoms covered by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We respect the rights of people, the rights to their faith, and we support multiculturalism in our country. We respect the laws and rights of all Canadians in this House and across the country. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Madam Speaker. On many occasions, the Prime Minister has stated that social acceptability is required for Energy East. However, social acceptability doesn't come from the National Energy Board. It comes from the people. The people, Madam Speaker. The NEB shouldn't be telling us what to do. And people are saying no to Energy East. On Tuesday, Gatineau spoke out against the Energy East pipeline. So 75% of Quebec's largest cities have officially rejected it. What will it take for the government to understand that Quebecers don't want Energy East? They don't want it.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, every once in a while, the member rises in her place and wants to decide herself what the government should do about a project that's currently in front of the regulator. The National Energy Board will look at evidence, and I'm sure would be very pleased to consider what the honourable member has to say. But for the government to respond to that question and kill a project that has not yet been considered would be irresponsible.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canadian health transfers provide long-term predictable funding for provinces and territories and are meant to ensure the universality and accessibility of health care for all Canadians. However, the per capita allocation of this funding does not account for Nunavut's unique regional and infrastructural realities, making it completely inadequate. Will the Minister of Health commit to addressing this inadequacy and adjust this dated system to ensure that Nunavut have the same level of service that all other Canadians enjoy? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Madam Speaker, I thank the member from Nunavut for the question. I had the opportunity to speak to the territorial health ministers this week, and we discussed the unique circumstances in the territories and the challenges of delivering care. We will, of course, continue with the Canada Health Transfer to support the territories. In addition, there is a territorial formula financing to the tune of $1.5 billion, which goes to Nunavut each year and which helps to facilitate the expenses in health. In addition to that, there is a territorial health investment fund in the order of $60 million. We're very pleased to make sure that people in the territories, including Nunavut, get the care that they need.
Étant donné que c'est la fin de la période de...
It now being the end of question period.
We will be returning to routine proceedings.
Documents. Tabling of documents. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to table a document from the Council of Canadians of Winnipeg, which was created in support of the reinstatement and the enhancement of the Navigable Waters Act. In order to protect rivers, the 99% of rivers like the Bloodbane River in Manitoba, which have no protection.
Does the member have unanimous consent to table the documents? No. There's no unanimous consent. Tabling of documents. Dépôt de documents. Introduction of government bills. Ms. Wilson-Raybould, seconded by Mrs. Philpott, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Code. This motion, victim surcharge. This motion is deemed adopted. Ms. Wilson-Raybould, seconded by Mrs. Philpott, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read? C'est ça? When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Introduction of government bills. Statements by members. Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Presenting committee reports presenting reports from committees. Dépôt de projet de loi.
Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motions. Presenting petitions.
For Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm proud to present a petition signed by many Canadians regarding a petition for a national strategy for Canadian seniors. So I would like to table this today and hope that everybody will look at this seriously as an important matter for all seniors in our growing economy.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
To present a petition signed by dozens of people from the Kitchener-Waterloo area. They are calling on this House to ensure that we update the current voting system to ensure more fair representation so that the results of elections better reflect the will of the voters. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to present a petition stating it is impossible for a person to give informal consent to assisted suicide or euthanasia if appropriate palliative care is unavailable to them. Therefore, the petitioners are calling on Parliament to establish a national strategy on palliative care. Thank you, Madam.
Presenting petition, présentation de pétition, the honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to present petition from residents of Nanaimo, Ladysmith, opposing establishment of new commercial bulk anchorages off the coastline of Gabriola Island. They are intended to transport Wyoming coal to China, exacerbating climate change. The anchorages themselves have oil spill risk. Their anchors will scour the sensitive seabed, interfering with commercial and recreational fishing in the region. I am disappointed that the Prime Minister and Transport Minister have not replied to my call for them to urge the proponent to withdraw the application. We hope that this petition will urge the government to take leadership on this important economic and environmental issue. Thank you.
I just want to remind members when they're tabling petitions, they're tabling what is in the petition and shouldn't be giving their opinion on the issue. Presenting petitions, présentation de pétitions. Questions on the order paper. Questions écrites au feuilleton. Monsieur Damoureux, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I would just ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Allowed. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Government orders, government bills, Commons, resuming debate at second reading stage of a bill, Bill C-26, an act to amend the Canada Pension Plan, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act, and the Income Tax Act.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. What a pleasure it is to rise today to talk about a bill that I think should receive overwhelming support from all members of this House, even though I realize, Madam Speaker, that at least one...
Excuse me. I believe I made a bit of an error on there. Yeah. Oh, Hamilton Mountain. Okay. I'm sorry. I had... it wasn't dark, and I highlighted, I didn't see who the next speaker was aside from you, so I would like to recognize the, you'll get a second chance. I would like to recognize the member from Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I know you're going to be next, sir. Madam Speaker, it is my privilege to rise today to speak to Bill C-26, an act to amend the Canada Pension Plan, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act, and the Income Tax Act. Bill C-26 amends the Canada Pension Plan Act to incorporate the recent agreement reached between the provinces to enhance CPP benefits. While better was possible, and the full effect of the changes would not be felt for another 49 years, this CPP expansion is an important first step in improving retirement security for young Canadians. And we congratulate everyone, especially Labour, who have worked so hard to lay the groundwork for this agreement. We must now see immediate action to help those seniors and Canadians on the cusp of retirement who won't benefit from these changes. Government must build on the momentum of this agreement and take the steps to improve long-term retirement security for today's workers. Madam Speaker, retirement and security is reaching a crisis level in Canada as many Canadians do not have adequate savings to maintain their lifestyle upon retirement. A large part of this problem is fueled by the erosion of workplace pension plans to the point that 6 in 10 working Canadians have no workplace pension. During election 2015, the Liberals promised to enhance the CPP. Once elected, the Minister of Finance was directed in his mandate letter to meet with your provincial territory colleagues at your earliest opportunity to begin a process to enhance the Canada Pension Plan to provide more income security to Canadians when they retire. The Finance Minister met with the provincial and territory counterparts in June 2016, and on June 20th announced an agreement in principle for CPP enhancement. On October the 4th of this year, British Columbia was the final province, besides Quebec, to officially endorse this agreement. Bill 26 was introduced for the first reading on October 6th. Quebec did not sign the agreement, but promised to apply some of the changes to the Quebec pension plan, which is similar to the CPP, but is managed independently. Madam Speaker, the NDP will support this bill at this time, but we feel the bill does not live up to the expectations Canadians had for CPP reform. Changes to the plan have been a long time in the making. The last time the CPP was altered was in 1997. Although those changes were largely administrative, the most significant change in the 1997 amendments was to move the plan from a pay-as-you-go system to a fully funded. This change was done to help protect the financial viability of the plan, and a recent report by the Chief Actuary of Canada shows a healthy fund that will be solvent for at least the next 75 years. However, during a time when the availability of workplace pensions cover fewer and fewer Canadians, when Canadians have been finding it harder and harder to put away money for their retirement, and when the rates of seniors living in poverty has steadily increased, there have been no increases in the benefits under the Canada Pension Plan. Many Canadians held out great hope for this government to make substantial changes to the CPP. Sadly, like many Liberal promises, we are offered a loaf of bread, but only receive half a loaf. Ken Newman, National Director of the Canadian Steelworkers, summed it up very well when he said, "The Liberals' government plan for a modest CPP expansion falls well short of the doubling of CPP benefits, advocating for by the United Steelworkers and the Canadian Labour Movement. The USW is nonetheless pleased that the provinces and the federal governments have agreed to a universal expansion of the CPP that will help all workers. We will continue to push for the full doubling of the CPP benefits." New Democrats, along with many in the Labour movement and groups working for the rights of seniors and retirees, have long advocated that benefits be increased from replacing at 25% of workers' pre-retirement income to 50% of pre-retirement income. But no, this legislation has offered up a very modest increase from 25% to 33 1/3 of pre-retirement income. Although we like to see an increase, we feel the amount is wholly inadequate, especially in terms of ensuring that our seniors don't have to live in poverty and can retire with the dignity and quality of life they deserve. Madam Speaker, while many are happy to finally see some changes to the plan and some increases in benefits, there are many who are going to be very unhappy. And those are the people who will see no or very little benefit from the changes presented in this bill. I'm hearing more and a lot of confusion of misunderstandings concerning who will benefit from the changes being proposed. A recent Ipsos poll found that over 25% of those already retired believe that they will see bigger CPP checks as a result of the deal, and that more than 70% of Canadians don't realize that current retirees get nothing from this CPP expansion. These findings are totally consistent from what I've been hearing. Many retirees stop to ask me when they will be receiving their increased benefits in my riding. I have to break the bad news to them that this new legislation will do nothing for current or soon-to-be retirees. The Enhanced Expanded CPP is a plan that will benefit a new generation of workers entering the workforce, but does little to alleviate the retirement income crisis for those approaching retirement. Those who will be the first to benefit from the fully enhanced benefits under this plan are now 16 years old. That's right. It will take 49 years for this plan to fully kick in. After the increase in premiums are fully phased in 2025, a person will have to pay the increased premiums for 40 more years to be fully eligible for the new maximum benefits. Increased benefits will be prorated for those 40 years as people pay the increased premium, but any significant increase for retirees is years and years away. Let me take some time to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the plan. Currently, the CPP covers earnings up to a cap of $54,900. For earnings up to the cap, the CPP aims to replace about 25% of that income. So the maximum pension comes in at about $1,092 a month, or $13,100 per year. Contributions are 4.9% of each of the employer and the employee, up to the same cap. The expanded CPP is a new separate tier. This new tier is added on top of the existing CPP. The new CPP tier does two things. Phased in over the next 9 years to 2025. First, it takes the replacement rate of up to 33.3% from the current 25%. Second, it expands the upper earnings cap from today's $54,900 up to $82,700. When the plan is fully phased in 2065, a worker who earns $54,900 would receive a maximum annual pension of about $18,117 by the time they retire. For a worker at $82,700 income level, CP benefits will rise to a maximum of $20,352 a year. Once the phase-in period is reached in 2025, it will take 40 years for a person to receive the fully enhanced benefit. Therefore, the first worker who will be eligible for full benefits is currently 16 years old, a person who was 59 in 2019 and pays 6 years of the enhanced premiums and retires in 2025 at the age of 65 will receive no additional benefit or maybe $1 or $2. It is important to note that much of the discussion about pension benefits relates to maximum benefits, yet only 11.4% actually receive the maximum CPP benefits. The average benefits amounts as of July 2016 was $550. In order to pay for the increase in benefits, contributions for employees and employers will increase. This increase will be phased in between 2019 and 2025. There will be 2 tiers to the increase. Between 2019 and 2025, those earnings less than the yearly pensionable maximum earnings, which is currently $54,900, will see their premiums slowly rise to an additional 1%. Those workers and employees will then be paying at a rate of 5.9%, up from 4.9%. In real numbers, this means a person whose rate is set at the maximum will pay an additional $43 per month, as will their employer. The second tier increase will be phased in over 2 years, starting in 2024. And for anyone earning above the yearly pensionable maximum, their employees' contributions will rise by 4% above the current. I know this is all very confusing, and it's going to take some time for Canadians to understand the complexities. And Madam Speaker, the bill also makes some changes to the Income Tax Act, which are supposed to help minimize the impact of the premium increases on Canadians. The CPP premiums a worker currently pays are treated as a tax credit. An individual is able to claim a percentage of premiums paid as a non-refundable tax credit, which is then deducted from total federal tax payable. This will not change. These contributions will now be considered as base contributions, but will still be treated the same for income tax purposes. The increased benefits a worker will be paying in 2019 and they keep paying thereafter will be considered as additional contributions and will be treated differently for tax purposes. A worker will be able to deduct the amount of the additional contribution directly off their taxable income instead of applying for it as a credit. The government has also included changes to the Income Tax Act in the bill which increased the working tax benefit by 14%. The intention is to minimize the impact of increased CPP premiums on low-income workers. Employers will be able to write off the increases of the CPP as a business expense, as they do now with the base contributions. And now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to talk briefly about Canada's retirement income system, which is based on 3 pillars. These pillars were also supposed to interact and work together and are intended to enable seniors to maintain a reasonable standard of living in retirement. The first pillar includes standardized and universal public benefits such as old age security and the guaranteed income supplement. The second includes mandatory public workplace coverage, the Canada Pension Plan and the Quebec Pension Plan. Almost all working Canadians over the age of 18 earning more than the minimum amount of $3,500 per year must pay into them. This is mandatory for employees and employers as deemed by legislation. Contributions are split evenly between the employee and the employer or borne fully by someone who's self-employed, and the amount depends on a person's income. The third consists of employer or union-sponsored plans known as the registered retirement plan. They are registered with the Canadian Revenue Agency and one of the pension regulatory authorities because they are subject to government support in the form of special tax measures and regulatory oversight. This pillar also includes registered retirement savings plans and other personal savings. The problem for today's seniors is that these pillars are falling behind in terms of enabling seniors to maintain an adequate standard of living. Dramatic increases in the cost of things like electricity and housing are causing great strain on seniors' fixed income. Failing to take action now will have a great social cost, forcing many seniors into poverty. The number of seniors being forced to use food banks will rise dramatically. Studies point to a looming crisis in the retirement income securities of Canadians. A recent study by Richard Shillington, done for the Broadbent Institute, shows a large percentage of older working Canadians are heading into retirement without adequate savings to keep them out of poverty. The report goes on to say that half the Canadian couples between 55 and 64 have no employer pension plan between them, and of those, less than 20% of middle-class income families have saved enough to adequately supplement government benefits in the Canada-Quebec pension plan. Income trends suggest the percentage of Canadian seniors living in poverty will increase in the coming years, especially for single women who already face a higher than average rate. The poverty rate for seniors will climb at the same time as a sharply rising number of Canadians hit retirement in the next 2 decades. More than 20% of the population will be older than 65 within 10 years. When releasing the report for the Broadbent Institute, Rick Smith, Executive Director, said, "This new data on retirement savings and gaps in support makes one thing perfectly clear. We have a retirement income crisis on our hands, and that requires urgent government action now." Increases in the guaranteed income supplement and these eventual increases in CP benefits will certainly help. But much more needs to be done to help our seniors live with the dignity they deserve. The high cost of housing and drugs, the clawback of the GIS, and the indexing of pensions are just a few immediate issues. This government needs to keep their promise to introduce a new seniors price index to make sure that the old age security and the guaranteed income supplement keep up with rising costs. The NDP will fight for further increases to the GIS and OAS, a national pharmacare program, as well as programs to enhance home care and palliative care. Much work needs to be done to ensure the workers can retire with adequate incomes and access to the services they need to meet their quality of life. The NDP will continue to work with our Labour allies and others to improve the lives of Canadians, seniors and retirees. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the comments and the support that's coming towards Bill C-26. I think in good part, the New Democrats are recognizing something in which we have recognized in many ways, and I hope to be able to talk about it, is the issue of how it is that we can assist seniors, whether it's from getting out of poverty or being able to continue to be a part of Canada's middle class and those aspiring to become a part of the middle class. And one of the ways that we can deal with that is through a CPP. And I'm wondering if the member can just provide comment in terms of the process of trying to achieve an agreement with the different provinces and Ottawa is not a simple one. And in fact, that's why many would argue it is somewhat of a historical agreement to have achieved this agreement that's ultimately going to see seniors receiving more money as a direct result. And if he can just maybe provide his thoughts or his understanding in terms of what needs to take place in order to get the bill to this level at this point in time.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for that question. I believe we all have to go Canadian-wide and have consultations with the public. I believe that this is such an important matter because if it's not being addressed of what's going to happen with our retirees going into the future, not just the future, but the ones that are coming forward in the next 10 or 15 years, then we are going to be in a crisis where actually social costs are going to be increasing dramatically. And this is going to be downloaded onto the provinces, from the provinces into the municipalities. So I think we all have to work together to show the importance. Like I said before, I don't think this goes far enough. It has to go farther. But I know there's such issues of the actual cost of this program, and it's very, very delicate. So we have to make sure that we do this in a manner that everybody that can agree to.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Member, thank you for his speech. Through you, ma'am. The new generation of people joining the workforce are very attuned to self-funding their pension funds and their future. And I wonder if the member could tell me if he thinks a person working for 40 years having to pay possibly an additional $2,200 a year during that duration, would he be better off taking that money? Because it was mentioned earlier that our government did nothing for them, but we did have the tax-free savings account. So if a person, an average person, was to take that $2,200 a year and put it into a tax-free savings account versus having or forced to pay that through the pension plan, when she or he receives it later on in life, he's going to be paying taxes on the CCP. He's not going to be paying taxes on his tax-free savings account. Thank you.
The honourable member can address me to answer him, only because he also went back to you. Anyhow, the honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and through you, and I thank you, the member, for the question. And if I got it right, would it be better for a person to take that money that he's contributing now into his own little retirement savings plan or something of a TFSA, something that will go into the future? From my experience, there's been nothing better than a defined benefit plan. Everybody has pros and cons of a defined contribution and a defined benefit. One has that because the money is there up in front, but it only lasts for so much, especially when people go to invest it and hoping that their investments came out very, very strong. A defined benefit plan lasts a lot longer, and it stays with that, and it's guaranteed to be there. So what I've noticed in my areas and through my working life is that the younger generation does not have enough money. And basically, they really don't care about retirement at that early age. They're looking for money to keep their head above water, and it only becomes after they're about 40 years or 45 years of age that those members or those workers then decide that, hey, I better do something about my retirement. It's too late. So I think what they're doing, investing into it for the 40 years, yes, there's going to be increases, just like there is with a private plan. You don't leave it stagnant because those dollars don't help. So you got to look at the future of the money that you're going to need. Thank you.
Comments, questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Trois-Rivières.
Honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Well, I'd like to thank my colleague very warmly for simplifying such a complicated issue that goes back to rather these changes that will take place up to 2025. I probably will no longer be on this earth at that time. Now, we have talked about the maximum yearly earnings and the maximum benefits, but the reality is that quite a good proportion of people don't manage to put in their maximum. So should we not explore other avenues, like bringing in a $15 an hour minimum wage so that people would have more money available for pensions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for that question. And it's a very good point. And one of the problems that we're having with the way the CPP is set up now is you have to work those years at the maximum levels to get the maximum benefit as long as you pay the maximum contribution. But unfortunately, because many plants have now been dissolved or people are losing their job or they could be hurt, they have to have a gap in that area, which actually takes effect on the amount of benefits or they're going to receive later on in life. So the member makes a good point. I know when the U.S. steelworkers went and were forced into retirement, okay, and lost a big benefit to those jobs and lost a benefit now in their CPP going in the future, are now looking at jobs that are minimum wage, and it's going to affect their payments when they go to hit 60 or 65. So $15 an hour starting point would be very, very helpful in increasing the CPP benefit at the end of their lifetime. Thank you.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you to the member for his speech. I appreciated very much the comments about seniors because I have a lot of seniors in my riding. And I thought he might find it interesting to hear what the finance minister said in his book about seniors. Whatever the reason might be to expand the CPP, it's not to eliminate poverty. The poverty rate among seniors is now as close to zero as we can get. That's what the finance minister's book says. And I don't agree with that at all. I think seniors are struggling, as the member has said, and I believe that this current program that we're discussing is not going to do anything for the next 40 years. And so the people that are seniors in my community right now, they need something else. This is not going to do anything to address the need. I wonder if the member could comment.
The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Yes, thanks, Madam Speaker. And through you, great point, and I've been saying that into my speech. The current retirees are living in poverty, and especially because of the lack of affordable housing, they're forced to pay market rent on very limited retirement security. So it's making a real hard problem. So what we have to do is we got to make sure that we don't fall in the same trap as we have now. We have to do something for our next generation, that's for sure, to make sure that they're not put in the same spot. But at the same time, we must improve on what we're doing now for the people that are currently on retirement and going on the cusp of retirement. And that's what I said in my speech. We must work together on this to make sure whether it's the old age security is going to be raised, whether it's going to be a GIS is going to be further increased, to make sure none of this stuff gets clawed back. But we have to do something for now, today. So I certainly agree with the member for asking that. Thank you.
Reprise de débat, resuming debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And as I was wanting to indicate previously, what a privilege it is to be able to stand in my place, to be able to talk about what I believe is one of those fundamental issues that I believe Canadians as a whole would be so supportive of. And if you take a look in terms of what will ultimately happen on Bill C-26, I would encourage all members of all political parties to recognize the historic agreement that was achieved by the Minister of Finance and the government, and to recognize that by voting in favor of C-26. You know, the previous Conservative member posed a question in regards to the Minister of Finance by saying, well, you know, the Minister of Finance wrote a book, and in that book he said that you know, raising CPP is not going to get rid of poverty for seniors. What the member doesn't necessarily make reference to is it's that very same Minister of Finance that brought forward a 10% increase into those poorest seniors in Canada by increasing the guaranteed income supplement. That will have a profound positive impact for seniors, Mr. Speaker, in the most significant way. In fact, I would challenge future Conservative speakers on this issue to tell me and give me an example of where you will find Conservative policy where you have seen such a substantial increase to seniors, you know, Canada's poorest seniors. They will be challenged to find that, Mr. Speaker. And that's one of the reasons why I think that we always have to, when we look at a policy announcement, such as what we're really seeing today in a very formal way in the House of Commons, that we always take a look at it that this is just one component in terms of dealing with seniors. Let me somewhat now start off with what I believe is something that needs to be said. You know, we campaigned about real change, Mr. Speaker, and we campaigned about real change primarily because one of the things that we realized with the former Harper government is that they had lost touch with Canadians. They didn't understand what it is that Canadians were wanting and expecting of the government. And there's a number of things that we can talk about. I can talk about the outstanding performance from our Minister of Health, fighting for health care here in Canada, something in which the former government did not do, Mr. Speaker. Canadians see that as a positive. the Conservatives just didn't understand that. They didn't understand what it is that Canadians want. The same principle applies here, Mr. Speaker, where I can clearly demonstrate that the Conservative Party, not only of the past, but what appears to be today. Now, I'll wait and see what happens when the vote actually takes place, Mr. Speaker. But if they want to demonstrate that they are listening to Canadians, I would suggest to you that they really need to support this bill. Bill C-26 is something that is of a historic nature. It is not easy to get all the different stakeholders together and ultimately get an agreement of this nature, which is ultimately going to see more money going into the pockets of seniors when they retire. And once implemented, Mr. Speaker, it is in a significant amount of money. Decisions of this nature don't happen overnight. I was pleased by my New Democratic colleague made reference to others and how they actually participate in ultimately achieving what it is that we've achieved. This isn't just solely a Liberal initiative, Mr. Speaker. We know different stakeholders, not only from Labour, but also from business, that have presented and commented on the importance of the Canada Pension Program. It actually reaches out, Mr. Speaker, to the individual, to the corporate body, to our union body, to political entities, and many different stakeholders. I've said in the past on how much I appreciate the fine work that many unions do in terms of advocating far beyond what is their core responsibilities, but they think ahead not only of the individuals that they represent within the unions, but often way beyond those individuals by talking about the importance of increasing CPP. I've heard presentations of that nature from members of union executives for many, many years. And that's why when I stand up today, I said, well, this is really good stuff. Mr. Speaker, when we look at it, and our Prime Minister has mandated our members of Parliament on this side, and even when he was leader of the third-party opposition here, that he wants his MPs to represent their constituencies here in Ottawa. And it was a change. It's part of that real change. Because under the Harper government, more often than what we saw was Ottawa being represented inside the constituencies. What we want to be able to see is MPs representing their constituents and their interests and the thoughts from their constituents coming into this chamber, going into the committee rooms, talking within caucus walls, subcommittees, and so forth, Mr. Speaker. And that's why when we look at Bill C-26, what we're seeing is a reflection of that. Bill C-26, in essence, is saying that we believe that the workforce in Canada today is going to require an additional money when it comes time for pensions. It's no surprise to me personally, and I suspect that you'll find a vast majority of members of Parliament won't be surprised by that, Mr. Speaker. I can remember sitting in the opposition benches arguing that we needed to do more with regards to supporting our seniors. I introduced petition after petition after petition on this very issue, that Canadians expected us to do more. Many, if not most, probably even all of those petitions with that specific issue on the CPP, GIS, and OAS, Mr. Speaker, came from residents that I represent in Winnipeg North. And they wanted to be able to see a government take action and support those pensions and expand those pension programs where we could. The Prime Minister gave a fairly clear indication to the Minister of Finance that we want to achieve an agreement at looking at expanding the CPP. And I am forever grateful that our Minister of Finance was so successful at achieving that agreement, because it is something in which the government alone cannot do, Mr. Speaker. We needed to be able to get the cooperation and the understanding of provinces in order to make that happen. I remember sitting in opposition benches and feeling somewhat frustrated because I would hear about, for example, the province of Ontario saying, well, we want CPP to be increased, but feds are not interested in going, and the feds at that time with Prime Minister Stephen Harper were not interested. The former Prime Minister had no interest in increasing the CPP. In fact, he was quite prepared to see individual provinces go alone. Man, remember, Mr. Speaker, I said losing touch with Canadians? Had the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, listened to what Canadians wanted on the CPP file, what he would have found out was that Canadians were concerned about their ability to be able to retire and the earnings that they were going to be receiving, and that they supported en masse the need to be able to see that increase, Mr. Speaker. But the then Prime Minister didn't recognize that. So, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, what we have before us, I believe, is a piece of legislation. And that's why I talk about the issue of real change at the beginning. Because that's what we are seeing in this legislation. Now, members have the opportunity to participate in that real change, because there was a different attitude with the former Conservative government in regards to the CPP. And now we've taken a complete 180, Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker, where we are seeing a government of Canada now saying we want to increase CPP, and they've taken the necessary actions in order to be able to present this bill today. Now, I can provide some comments in terms of the number of consultations at the Ministry of Finance, and that's just strictly with the Ministry of Finance, and staying out of what individual members of Parliament have done, Mr. Speaker, have taken, listening to the many different stakeholders, whether it's from Labour, business, Indigenous people, the different individuals that have taken the time and either written correspondence through the internet or had face-to-face discussions at free meetings throughout this country, Mr. Speaker, on the importance of taxation and policy ideas. And I suspect you will find that many of those discussions talked about the CPP. As I know, I've had many discussions on that particular issue. So those discussions were then taken in the form and presented ultimately to the different provinces sitting around a table, where in fact back just a few months back, I believe, Mr. Speaker, if my note is correct, back on June the 20th, in Vancouver, where that agreement was actually accepted. And because of that agreement, Madam Speaker, we now have Bill C-26. When you think of what it is that Bill C-26 specifically, going to the bill summary, you'll find that it increases the amount of the retirement pension as well as the survivors and disability pensions and the post-retirement benefit, subject to the amount additional contributions made and the number of years over which those contributions are made. Increases the maximum level of pensionable earnings by 14% by the time we get into 2025, Mr. Speaker. That's a significant, Madam Speaker, amount of increase. Providing for the making of additional contributions, which would in fact begin at 2019, which was something that was accepted primarily because there does need, and we recognize that there needs to be an adjustment period so that businesses are able to adjust and other stakeholders, Madam Speaker. Provide for the creation of the additional Canada Pension Plan account and the accounting of funds in relation to it. It also, Madam Speaker, includes the additional contributions and increased benefits in financial review for provisions of the Act authorize the Governor in Council to make regulations in relation to those provisions. Madam Speaker, why is it such an important issue for all of us to address? I'd like to reflect on some issues from my constituency, and I believe that those issues can be mirrored across Canada. I look at it, Madam Speaker, by saying that within my constituency is a good, healthy number of seniors and When I talk in terms of seniors, many would argue, well, it's debatable in terms of what age does a senior begin. In fact, I was told as I'm approaching 55 in January that at some point I will be eligible for some store discounts, Mr. Speaker. So I understand and I appreciate that I might even myself be getting somewhat close to that. But on the other hand, I have had the privilege of knocking on, as all of us have, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of doors. And I have knocked on doors where I've had 94-year-olds, in particular one that I can think of, Madam Speaker, where you would think that the person was in her 60s, very spry and alive and very active, Madam Speaker. So age in good part is how you feel. And there's a lot of seniors in Winnipeg North that feel great and want to be able to have a decent standard of living. And in those doors that I knocked on, let me share a couple of specific examples. One of the most saddest things that I often run into is when you knock on a door and you're talking to a senior, and that senior will talk about how they're having such a difficult time in order to make ends meet. Often they'll say, for example, I have an issue of medications versus food. My budget does not allow me to be able to afford both. And Madam Speaker, this isn't just a comment that I would hear at one or two doors. I would hear it at numerous doors. Our seniors, in many ways, are challenged in having to make difficult decisions related to affordability issues, some of those very basic needs. We have far too many seniors that will say, okay, fine, I'm going to opt for buying my medications, and as a result of that, quite often they will go hungry, which is not good for their health, or they will end up going to food banks, Madam Speaker. And I thank God for the food banks that are there, and those huge number of volunteers that make that happen, and especially those that contribute to our food banks. Because in good part, they are helping many seniors that are in fact in poverty. That is a very real issue that we hear at the door. In fact, Madam Speaker, I can recall one incident, and I was with my daughter, Cindy, where we knocked on a door, and a lady answers the door, and she's virtually in tears because she just got hit with an ambulance bill of $500 plus, and she had no idea what she could do in terms of being able to pay for that particular bill. Well, Madam Speaker, I'm glad that my daughter went on ultimately to become a local MLA, and she's actually raised that particular issue inside the Manitoba legislature, recognizing how important, our health care. And I always think, if someone has a heart attack in their house and they have to get to a hospital, they don't have much of a choice. And if they have a low income or they're living in poverty or a fixed income, then they get this bill. And that's why I'm very grateful in terms of just how we need to advocate for our seniors. These are very real situations that are taking place, Madam Speaker, every day throughout our country. And that's why when we have the opportunity to take a look at pensions and the issue of pensions, we should be supportive, I would argue. If you canvass your constituents, you will find that there is a great appreciation and desire that we not only support our current, those basic three pension programs, but where we can, that we expand them, Madam Speaker. For all those seniors that I've met with at the doors, I know that increase to the GIC is going to help them, and it's going to help them immensely. You will get some of those single seniors receiving up to $900 plus a month more than what they received last year, Madam Speaker. That will go a long way for a senior that's living in poverty in being able to get some of the things that they really and truly need. And that's why when we talk about Bill C-26 today, but it is about that social safety net that Canadians truly believe in. You ask your constituent, what makes you feel good about being a Canadian? Some of the most common responses you will get is related to our social safety net. So you ask yourself, what is that social safety net? Madam Speaker, it is our CPP, what we are voting on today. It is our OAS, our GIS, our healthcare system, our employment system, employment insurance system, Madam Speaker. They provide peace of mind and comfort to Canadians. These are the things in which I believe that we should be speaking more about, not just inside the chamber, but we should be speaking more about it within our caucuses, within our committees. We have fantastic standing committees that have the ability to set an agenda to look at real progressive, positive social ideas, Madam Speaker, and I think that we can better utilize those committees, and I've argued in the past and will continue into the future that that is the future backbone of our parliamentary process, is those standing committees. So we need to support where we can. Madam Speaker, I realize that my time is quickly running out, but I do want to emphasize just how important C-26 really is. This is a piece of legislation that ultimately should be supported by all members. If you reflect in terms of the past debates inside this House on this very important issue, and if you believed in CPP and expanding CPP, one would have been disappointed. But with the change in government and the commitment from this particular Prime Minister, we now have a change in attitude, a real tangible change where CPP will in fact increase. It will prevent seniors in the future from, many seniors in the future from having to make very difficult issues, Madam Speaker. It'll even prevent some seniors from going into poverty. This is a bill in which all members I would highly recommend support. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to share a few words and thoughts.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
The member opposite speaking about visiting the doors of many seniors. We all have seniors. We all visit the doors and knock on many, many doors. But the way the minister, his minister and his government handle that doesn't mean, it doesn't seem to be that they visited any door or speak to any seniors. Because those seniors that he's talking about, they're not going to benefit at all from this tax hike. This is a tax hike on the businesses first and on people next, and this is going to be very costly. There's no true story is being told to those seniors, because if they hear the true story and if the doors are being really knocked, then they will know that this is a tax burden on them and their future generations and on small businesses, and this is not going to help them by any chance.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
Well, Madam Speaker, that's just not true. I just finished talking about the GIS. That's very real. It's tangible. There's going to be hundreds of seniors, if not thousands of seniors, that are going to benefit by that program this year within Winnipeg North alone. All constituencies have seniors. All seniors that receive GIS will, in fact, benefit this year. When the Prime Minister indicated he wanted us to talk to real Canadians and understand the issues and then bring them back to Ottawa, well, I can tell you, the members, individuals that I met with, that whether they work at fire industries, whether they're working in hospitals, whether they work in all the different industries, they understand and they appreciate. If you're 40 years old or you're 35 years old, now's the time in which you want to be able to ensure that when it comes time for retirement, that there's going to be a substantial amount of money in that Canada Pension program, Madam Speaker. And that's what I mean when we say in the future we are going to be preventing those 45-year-olds and so forth from having to possibly be on a borderline whether or not they're in poverty or they're being able to afford the things that they need to afford. What it is thinking forward. And that's something in which this government has clearly demonstrated, whether it's issues related to our environment or issues related to our seniors. We think about the people that are coming into the system as well.
Questions and comments? Questions and commentaires. The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and through you and to the member of Winnipeg North. Thanks very much. And you made some good points, and one of the things I think that we can agree with is that
so he made some good points as opposed to you. That would be acceptable. It has to be all through the Speaker. Thank you very much.
So, Madam Speaker, through you to the member, some good statements were made about what we're going to do now for the people that we got to help them out going into the future. So we've made some adjustments through the CPP on this bill by going for our future generation, but what about the people now? So I'm wondering, prior to 2012, Madam Speaker, it used to be that a person had options to, when he retired, he could collect his pension at 60, or he could collect his pension at 70. If he collected it early, they used to get a reduction, but it was needed, and we did that to help the people that were forced into retirement, or they couldn't do it for health reasons any longer because of whatever type of environment they were working in. But prior to 2012, we used to have that, and it was a 0.5% per month reduction. So it was a maximum of 30%. And then in 2012, it came in small increments, and it was increased to 0.6%, which actually made a maximum of 35% a reduction at the age of 60. So this really, really hurt a lot of people, and it took a lot out of their pocketbooks. So I'm wondering, through you, Madam Speaker, to the member, would you be willing, would you go to your government and ask them to go back to the 30% maximum to help the people that are now, or in just coming up into the future, that have lost their jobs, Madam Speaker?
So we have to allow for more time for other parties to have questions as well and for answers. And again, when we're mentioning the word you, that's not acceptable. It should be he or she or through me. So the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I think that what we need to do, and I'll attempt to answer the question the best I can, what we need to take a look at is we have one bill dealing with one of Canada's, and from my perspective, top three pensionable issues, that being CPP. And you know, it's going to be the working class of today that's really going to benefit by this particular bill, Madam Speaker, in a very real and tangible way. Within this last year, we've also seen the Government of Canada reverse the Conservative decision to increase the age of retirement, going in the opposite direction. The Conservatives were suggesting in order to claim OAS that you had to wait till you were 67. Well, as a government, we've reversed that position. We're saying, no, let's bring it back to 65 because Canada can, in fact, afford to do that, Madam Speaker. Then you take a look at our other third component, the GIS. The GIS has received a substantial, and that's why I challenge the Conservatives and to any member, a substantial increase to the GIS to the tune of many seniors, fixed income, low income, Winnipeg North. Madam Speaker, I can tell you, many of my seniors, we're talking probably 1,000 plus seniors that are going to have huge increases that are taking effect now, Madam Speaker. These are the things in which the government has done all within a year. With the specifics that the member makes reference to, I would suggest that he works with the Standing Committee, talk about it as a Standing Committee, see if we can even get the Standing Committee to possibly take it into consideration sometime over the not-too-distant future. You never know.
The comments, questions, and commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Labour.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to commend my colleague for his speech in the House today. He's a veteran member of the Chamber, and I'd like his comments on this. Just the stark contrast between how the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper announced the increase in the age qualification to receive OAS from 65 to 67, where he wasn't even in the country. He was abroad at a World Economic Forum.
it was not announced in his campaign in 2011. There was no mention of it, so he just sort of heaped this on some of the most disadvantaged in our country, whereas in this particular case, it was central to our campaign. Canadians knew what this government was offering, and they voted to support our party in the last election because they knew what this government was offering. The transparency, the openness, how both situations were handled, does he not see the contrast? And I'm sure the Canadians see the contrast as well.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, I thank my colleague and good friend for what I think is a fantastic question. You know, I can recall it, actually, because I was sitting on the other side with my colleague, and at the end of the day, when the announcement was actually made, I'm not even 100% sure if we were in session or if it was the following day. It might have been on a weekend, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister is somewhere overseas, and then we find out that he's increasing the age of retirement from 65 to 67. The response was immediate, Madam Speaker, from my constituents, and I would suspect Canadians as a whole, where does this come from? And then they try to generate some sort of a crisis that just wasn't there. Virtually from day one, the Liberal Party indicated that if we form government, that we would decrease it, get it back to 65, and that is one of the things that we did virtually immediately upon taking office, Madam Speaker. And that's, in good part, I pick up on the point, that is a part of this real change that the Prime Minister had promised, Madam Speaker. And I'm glad to say, whether it's the reducing from 67 to 65, or the increase to the GIS, or Bill C-26, these are all changes that have had a profound positive impact for our seniors and future seniors.
And comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Yellowhead. Just a very brief question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to thank the member from Winnipeg North for his speech. But, Canada's savings rate has climbed from 7.7% back in the 90s to 14.1% today. And that was according to CD Howe Institution. And then just the other day, Finance Canada said that the higher CPC premiums will hurt the economy by reducing private savings by 7%. Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like that member to comment on that. It sounds like we're going backwards.
Brief response for the Minister, for
yes,
the Parliamentary Secretary.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, if this was of concern for the member, I'll respect that, but I can tell the member that in order for us to get this bill before us today, you had to get the agreement of the provinces in Canada. Obviously, there are many stakeholders in other government jurisdictions that are following the lead that's been demonstrated by this Prime Minister and this government, and that's why we have the bill for us today. It's a good thing for Canada's middle class and those aspiring to be a part of it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Foothills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today on Bill C-26. And I think what we're hearing today is, a frightening trend from the Liberal government where we're going to impose some punitive taxes without consultation, with very little feedback from stakeholders. We're going to, and really very little knowledge on the economic impact that these decisions and these policies are going to have on Canadian families and Canadian small businesses specifically. First we started with the carbon tax, which is going to make, increase the cost of pretty much everything. Then we changed the mortgage rules, which is making it that much more difficult for young Canadians to buy their first homes. And now we're talking about a hike to the CPP, which is going to really hamper growth in our small business sector. These are all decisions and policy that have been imposed by this Liberal government with absolutely no consultation and no study in the ramifications that this is going to have on Canadian families, small businesses, and the provinces. I'm the Vice Chair of the Standing Committee on Natural Resources. We've been hearing from stakeholders over the last couple of weeks since the carbon tax was announced, and all of them are saying no one spoke to us about this. This is going to make the difference between us putting a shovel in the ground in some projects or walking away entirely. So what is going to be the ramifications and the implications to our energy industry, which is already struggling, when you impose a punitive carbon tax without any data to back it up on the economic impact of that decision? So yesterday in our Natural Resources Committee, we put forward a motion asking for the committee to do an emergency study on the economic impact of the carbon tax on the natural resources sector. If they are that confident in their policies, the carbon tax, the CPP tax hike, if they're that confident these are going to have beneficial and positive ramifications to Canadians across the country, then in my estimation that they would have agreed to go ahead with that study. But they didn't. They unanimously voted it down because they don't know the ramifications that policies like this are going to have on hardworking Canadian families. They are just plowing ahead with these kinds of decisions because they think it makes great politics for their very vocal minority, union bosses, big companies. Those are the ones that are driving these decisions. They are not talking to lower middle class Canadians, the ones that these decisions are going to impact in their pocketbook. That's what makes these types of decisions so frustrating. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak at a summit in Calgary, which was unfortunately titled "The Jobs Crisis for Energy Professionals in Alberta." There's more than 200 professionals at that meeting. These were not rig workers. These were not welders. These are not the people that we typically associate with feeling the impact of the downturn in the energy sector. These were petroleum engineers, geophysicists, geologists. Many of them have not had a job in more than 2 years. And I asked them afterwards, I said, well, were you consulted, were your associations consulted about the imposing of a carbon tax? Were you consulted about having a tax increase on the Canadian pension plan? Did the Liberal government come and talk to your associations, which would include thousands of Canadian professionals across the country? Did they talk to you about this? Every single one of them said no. This was a complete shock to us to see these things come forward.
Shameful.
And I asked them, well, we've had these ups and downs, booms and busts in the energy sector for decades. And they agreed, absolutely, we've gone through these many, many times. But this is the worst they have ever seen. And we heard it in question period today. We've heard it many times over the last week, that Alberta has been hit hard by the downturn because of low oil prices. A barrel of oil is now more than $50. It is not low oil prices are the only reason that Alberta is struggling right now. It is bad policy. It is inaction. It is tax increases on businesses and employers. They said they do not see a light at the end of this tunnel because of the policies being forward. A carbon tax, which is increasing indecision in this industry. It is driving away investment, and their jobs are going with them. We are going to lose that intellectual capital because of these decisions. We are uncompetitive globally in energy, manufacturing, agriculture, thanks to the decisions of this government to put forward a carbon tax and now a CPP tax hike, and not to mention the changes to the mortgage rules, which is making it more difficult for young families to buy their first home. And my colleague across the floor from Winnipeg North was saying when he was door knocking in his communities, he was overwhelmed by Canadians asking for these changes. I had zero. Not once did I go to a door and somebody said, boy, I am really looking forward to a carbon tax. I am really looking forward to a hike in my CPP taxes. And you know what? I really hope that you make it more difficult for me to buy my first home. I don't know, maybe residents of Southern Alberta are much more savvy. I'm not sure, but these issues were never raised in that campaign. So for them to say that they've had this incredible mandate because of what happened a year ago, I think is disingenuous. I think they are putting through decisions that they feel will appeal to a very vocal minority of Canadians that is not in the best interests of hardworking Canadian families. Now, I'd just like to talk about some of the things that have been said so far today about how this is going to help Canadians in their retirement. Having an increase in the CPP is great if I had a job, but now there's more than 200,000 Canadians who don't have jobs. And I haven't heard any decisions or any policies brought forward by this government that's going to help change that. And we had vehicles in place that will help Canadians save. And what I think is most important with those things, including the tax-free savings account, which this government decided to claw back. And again, in contrast to what my honourable colleagues have been saying, that is something I definitely heard at doors, is they liked the opportunity to save on their own terms. It is absolutely their money, and they want to make the decisions of what they do and how they save with their own money. I think it is definitely steps backwards when we look at government as being the answer to everything. You don't know how to save, government will take care of that for you. Canadians are much more savvy than this, unfortunately, this Liberal government is giving them credit for. Now, we also heard when the decision to claw back the tax-free savings account, we heard, well, this was just a vehicle for the wealthy. Only wealthy Canadians had the opportunity to invest in a tax-free savings account.
Absolutely not.
60% of those Canadians who had maxed out their tax-free savings account were making $60,000 or less. Those are not wealthy Canadians. Those are hardworking Canadian families who are making very tough choices for their future. They were putting money aside to buy that first home, which now unfortunately is even more difficult to buy. And I would ask where the government got the information that this was a good decision, maybe for Vancouver, maybe for Toronto, but certainly not for Calgary and rural Alberta. I certainly have not had anybody come to me and say this is a good decision, and I've had the exact opposite. Realtors, mortgages, credit unions, young families come to me and say, this is devastating. Now it's going to take me another decade to save up for that first home, which we know is one of their largest investments that they will have in their lifetime. But when I was going to doors last October, I had so many Canadians and so many residents in my riding of Foothills talk to me about the importance of the tax-free savings account and how welcoming they were that they would have an opportunity to invest further in a tax-free savings account. And like I said, these are Canadians who are making very difficult choices for their families, whether it was a first home, their child's education, saving for their own retirement. But the key to that is Canadians had the opportunity to make their own decisions on what they felt was best for them and best for their family and their children's future. This is a decision, once again, where government is imposing its will on Canadians. And Canadians have not said in any way, shape, or form that this is what they want. Whether it's a carbon tax, mortgage rule changes, tax-free savings account, electoral reform. I don't understand why this government feels that it should be governing with an iron fist, a sledgehammer, and imposing its will on the provinces and Canadians. This is certainly not what I heard from hardworking Canadian families or certainly folks in my riding throughout the election campaign and even before that. But I think what's really been overlooked here is the impact that this is going to have on small businesses. You know, it's ironic that we're having this discussion during Small Business Week here in Canada. I am hearing daily from small business owners in my riding in southern Alberta, but across the province, that they are struggling. And I don't think that's any mystery, despite the fact that our government and our Liberal government will not do anything about it, except say, you know, we have compassion and sympathy for what's going on in Alberta. We'll do something about it. Give us a hand. Imposing a carbon tax and now a CPP hike on small business owners is certainly not the way to do it. We have a very fragile economy right now in Alberta. And to impose these types of decisions when we are struggling does not make any sense. Alberta was the economic engine of this country for decades. And unfortunately, that engine is stalled. But rather than give us a lifeline, you're throwing us an anchor. And this is going to push those small business owners off the edge. Right now in Calgary, the unemployment rate is now in double digits. The vacancy rate in Calgary is at 30%, downtown Calgary. It's unbelievable for me now, in a province that I've raised my family and I've worked in, that I can go to downtown Calgary and see 8th Avenue deserted, to see entire floors of business buildings and office towers deserted. Nothing but empty desks, empty offices, and yet our top priority is to impose a Canada Pension Plan tax hike, which is going to cost business owners more than $1,000 a year per employee. And Dan Kelly, the President and CEO of the Canadian the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and I would just like to read his quote. 2/3 of small firms say they will have to freeze or cut salaries, and over 1/3 say they will have to reduce hours or jobs in their business in response to the CPP hike. So when we are already struggling with an unemployment rate close to double digits, in some communities well over double digits in Alberta, 200,000 energy jobs, direct and indirect jobs, have been lost. We're going to be further making employment numbers stressed. It's going to be more difficult for a small business owner to hire because of these increased costs through the CPP tax hike that I don't think anyone was really asking for. And here's another quote I wanted to bring up from Hendrik Brakel, a senior director at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. He said, "We are worried a big tax increase is headed to the middle class like an elbow to the chest. This comes at the worst possible time. An economy reeling from weak commodity prices and slower consumer spending will be lucky to eke out growth of 1.5% next year. It's difficult to stimulate the economy while pulling money out of the pockets of Canadians." Now, those are a couple, the Chamber of Commerce, which represents business across the country. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business, again, represents businesses across the country. These people are raising the alarm that what the impact this CPP tax hike will have on small businesses at the worst possible time. And I know we talk a lot about Alberta, but the energy downturn has impacted Canadians across the country. I was in Nova Scotia a couple of weeks ago, and it was amazing how many people I had come to me and say, you know what, I was working in Alberta, I was working the oil sands, but I had to come home, obviously, because there's no jobs. But there's no jobs for me here either. We need Energy East. We need policies in place that will kickstart our energy industry. But instead, when it's down, we kick it with a carbon tax and now a CPP tax hike. Where does this make sense? And Madam Speaker, I'm going to conclude with this. This is my question all along, is if they are so confident that these types of policies are going to bring this great positive change to our economy, is going to bring all these great jobs to Canadians, prove it. Show me the data. Show me that you did an economic impact study before you announced the carbon tax, before you announced the CPP tax hike. I haven't seen it. If you're so confident this is the best thing for Canadians, show it to me. Thank you.
So it's it's not mine. Were you done? There's still 5 minutes left. It's up to you. Okay. Okay. So questions and comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
The honourable member. I think it's Hull Aylmer, but I'm just going to check. Yes, the honourable member for Hull Aylmer. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I'd like to, through you, to thank the honourable member for his interesting speech which he gave, and I'm certain it's heartfelt and represents his constituents well. But he raised so many questions in that I couldn't resist the opportunity to ask some questions back to him, or at least share some of the observations which I had back in my own riding during the election. And one of them was that he mocked the idea that Canadians aren't supportive of putting a price on carbon pollution. And I could reassure the honourable member that at many times during the campaign, many times when I was going door to door, and I didn't have a safe riding. I had to work very hard to win the riding. So we spent many months, my team and I, knocking on 35,000 doors, and I heard over and over again that people wanted two things. They wanted Canada to take a leadership again on the international stage, and that meant re-engaging with our commitments which we made to deal with the environment. And at many times people brought up the notion of carbon pricing. The idea is very simple, at least in the case of British Columbia. Keep your taxes, keep your profits, but if you cause pollution, you pay for it. So I just want to reassure the member that that certainly was the case in my riding of Hull Aylmer.
Foothills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my honourable colleague for his question. I have a lot of respect for my colleague, and I just want to say to ensure that I think all of us worked very hard in our ridings during the election. I hope he's not insinuating that some of us have safe ridings and aren't in contact with the feelings of our constituents. And I appreciate, I'm sure some of the constituents in his riding were talking about a price on carbon. I wish they would just say what it is. It's a carbon tax. This price on carbon I find ridiculous. And I think anybody who says the famous last words of any government are revenue neutral, I think we all know that that's not going to be the case. But when he was going around to his constituents, did he tell them that it was going to be $50 a ton? Did he tell those people at the door that it was going to be 11 cents a litre on gas and another 14 cents a litre on diesel? Did he tell them that? Did he tell them, actually, it's not going to be the businesses that cause the pollution who are going to be paying for that carbon tax. It is going to be you paying for that carbon tax. Did he talk to the farmers and ranchers in my riding who are seeing their fuel prices double because of the carbon tax? This isn't a area where I have public transit and my residents can take a bus.
Didn't ask that.
The carbon tax is going to be extremely painful for rural Canadians.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Very much, Madam Speaker. And to the member from Alberta, I can totally empathize because during the 2008 global recession, in my own community, there was a huge job losses, and we saw over 6,500 jobs lost in the St. Thomas area and region. So I completely understand the concern for his constituents that he has. And we talk about this, and I recognize when I listen to the government speakers on this, they're really confusing this between the Canada Pension Plan and what they're doing for seniors for old age security and GIS. So I want to make sure that we separate those two things. There are two different pillars of the retirement, so I don't think I don't want Canadians to get confused with GIS and the CPP, so I want to just make that statement here. But we talk about the CPP investment, as they're calling it, and one of my greatest concerns is if we're going to see job losses, we're not going to see our youth who are just graduating from colleges and universities and our young families, we're not going to see them have jobs. So in the next time, they won't be able to put into the CPP anyway, because to pay tax, you need to have a job. And I'm just wondering what his thoughts are on how we're going to help those young families and those young students get on the path so that they can have economic independence.
I'll allow the question to be responded because we're running out of time, and if you brief answer, and you'll have some time left for your question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague from Middlesex London for a great question and all the advocacy that she's done for her riding, and especially young Canadians. My answer would be, this is absolutely backwards. Not only will these young people have a tough time finding jobs, but because they're paying into this, they will have a very difficult time repaying their student loans, saving up for a first home. So we're seeing youth unemployment now at more than 16%. It's going to be much, much worse, and they're going to have a much more difficult start to their professional lives.
The member will have just a little over 5 minutes left in questions and comments the next time that this matter is before the House. Comme il est 1h30.
It being now 1:30 p.m., we will now move to private members' business, as indicated on the order of business today. Private members' business. Resuming debate on motion M42 in the name of Mr. Saint-Marie. Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to share with you today some of the actions Canada is taking in the area of tax fairness. There's no doubt that this is a major responsibility of our government, and Canadians are expecting us to take effective action. The government has not waited before taking action. In December 2015, the government lowered taxes on the middle class and lowered the second tax bracket on individual income. For a single person, this means $330 less on average a year. For a couple, $540. Nearly 9 million Canadians have already started to benefit from this measure. Canadians rightly expect that everyone should pay his or her fair share of taxes, and this is why the tax rate has been increased on the most wealthy. So those earning over $200,000 will have a tax increase. Some might think that, well, there will always be some savvy people that manage to find loopholes, but the Canadian government is working hard on this problem and didn't wait for the Panama Papers revelations to do so. The Canadian government, in Budget 2016, brought in measures to deal with tax evasion and tax avoidance. $444.4 million has been given to the Canada Revenue Agency for 5 years of work on the issue. Concretely, this means that Revenue Canada will be able to hire 100 specialized auditors to focus on major international companies that present a risk. Revenue Canada will have the financial means to undertake investigations with up to $500 million over 5 years just to deal with multinational companies. Another concrete example is the inspections for Canadians that are considered high risk. There will be over 3,000 inspections carried out, costing up to, or rather, that will recover $432 million. Tax fairness means going further. We want to find those who abuse the system, so a team of 24 auditors will work to catch those who come up with tax schemes to help people avoid taxes. 200 cases will be examined every year, 10 times more than at present. The team will be able to carry out inspections, impose fines, and carry out call for criminal investigations if necessary, and they will have access to legal counsel so as to prepare cases properly to go before the tax court. Canada's actions mean that we will make sure that all Canadians contribute fairly, and this is why Budget 2016 also contains a $351.6 million investment over 5 years to recover unpaid taxes. Having Canadians pay their fair share gives the government the tax base it needs to be able to implement initiatives like the Canada Child Benefit, which is helping many families. A family can receive up to $6,400 for each child under the age of 6 and $5,400 for children between the ages of 6 and 17. Canadian families will have an increase in their benefits of some $2,300 a year in 2016-17. 9 out of every 10 families will benefit. These families work hard to improve their lives, like all Canadians, and they need to know that the government will not look the other way when other people don't uphold their obligations. Canada is going further and dealing with tax evasion with its partners abroad. Canada is one of the over 100 jurisdictions that is implementing common reporting standards for the automatic exchange of information for non-resident accounts. As reiterated in Budget 2016, Canada intends to implement the Common Reporting Standard on July 1st, 2017, and the first information exchanges will start in 2018. The government has made public the legislative proposals and did this on April 15, 2016, to implement the standard. The information will improve Canada's ability to identify cases of tax evasion to ensure compliance with tax rules. This is a clear and firm commitment that Canada has made to fight tax evasion and a clear signal to Canadians that the government is determined to have a fair tax system. Canada is working with its OECD partners and the G20 on the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Action Plan, called the BEPS. This is the set of tax planning strategies used by major international companies, even if they are legal, to exploit gaps between national and international tax rules in order to reduce their taxes. So OECD countries and the G20 have come up with recommendations to make sure that proper taxes are paid. These efforts to protect the integrity of the tax base were announced in Budget 2016, and they include the commitment to implement some of the recommendations of the BEPS action plan. We will introduce the country-by-country reporting system for major international companies. And this will make sure that the Canada Revenue Agency has an overview of the activities of these companies. For example, the companies will have to indicate the global allocation by country of certain variables like their consolidated turnover, the taxes paid or owing, the number of employees, and their tangible assets by giving a high-level overview of the activities of these companies. Country-by-country reporting will improve transparency and help the Canada Revenue Agency to manage risk better. So this is an example of some of the things that Canada is doing. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions? It's not questions and comments. Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. This motion called on the government to amend subsection 95.1 of the income tax and section 5907 of the income tax regulations to specify that no business that is entitled to a special tax benefit conferred by Barbados under the Canada-Barbados Income Tax Agreement Act 1980 should be exempt from taxation because of a tax treaty. In essence, it asks the government to override the Canada-Barbados Income Tax Agreement Act. I appreciate the sentiments of the member who sponsored this legislation. It is refreshing to hear members of the Bloc Québécois with ideas for the benefit of Canada, to propose legislation that would increase revenue for the Government of Canada. That being said, I do not feel that this motion should be supported. The underlying premise would seem to be to score some political points and condemn Canadians who use foreign shell companies for tax avoidance purposes. Given recent publicity regarding the Canada Revenue Agency and the offshore tax havens, that is bound to be a popular topic. But popularity and good legislation isn't always the same thing. Just as tax avoidance and tax evasion are not the same thing. Canadians all want to do what they can to avoid paying tax that they do not owe. It is when they cross the line of the law into tax evasion that governments need to take notice and act. I think this motion confuses the two and seeks to condemn those individuals and companies who are doing something perfectly legal. This year we celebrate the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Canada and Barbados, which was established on November 30th, 1966, the day Barbados became an independent country. But our relationship goes back much farther than that. The Canadian Trade Commissioner Service first established an office in Barbados in 1907. This long-standing connection explains in part why many Canadian financial institutions have long had a prominent presence in Barbados. Barbados and Canada have several bilateral financial agreements, including a 1986 Society Security Agreement, a 1997 Foreign Investment Protection Agreement, and a 1980 Double Taxation Agreement, which we are discussing today. As you are aware, Barbados is a part of Canada's constituency at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. We have ties through the Commonwealth, sharing a heritage as former British colonies. I think that behind this current motion is the belief that its implementation would somehow magically result in more money back to the hands of the Government of Canada. This is not necessarily the case. There are plenty of other tax havens globally. I cannot see that. Should Canada decide to unilaterally alter this agreement, there would be any net benefit for our country. Those who are law-abiding will not be paying more. Those are hiding money from Canada Revenue Agency will, I suspect, find somewhere else to hide their funds. The matter is more multifaceted than is accounted for under this motion. Madam Speaker, the Canada-Barbados Income Tax Agreement Act was designed to limit double taxation and prevent fiscal evasion with respect to taxes on income and capital. It applies to residents of both Canada and Barbados. It was first signed in 1980 with an amendment in 2011. Amendment made at that time primarily to follow in the framework of OECD treaty models and to ensure holding corporations, trusts, or partnerships that hold Canadian investments in real property and resource properties will be subject to Canadian taxation on sales of the shares of the holding corporations or the interests in partnerships or trusts. There is a general international tax principle that country in which immovable property is located should have the right to tax the gains from the disposition of such a property. The Canada-Barbados Income Tax Agreement Act is flexible with the intention to limit unfair and inefficient double taxation practices. I support this act. The Conservative Party supports this act. This motion to override the Act's provisions should be regarded skeptically. To suggest that Canada should unilaterally decide not to live up to an agreement we have signed is, in my opinion, irresponsible. To support the Canada-Barbados Income Tax Agreement Act is not to suggest support for tax evasion. In 2013, the Conservative government, in order to enhance the integrity of the tax system, created the Stop International Tax Evasion program, aimed at reducing international tax evading and avoidance. That the Canada Revenue Agency gained 3 times as much as new revenue than expected from measures introduced in 2013 budget is a tribute to the Conservative management. The Conservative Party has a strong, successful record of standing up to the international tax avoidance. Canadians believe in a fair tax system. All of us want to know that we are being treated fairly and equally under the law. While the Conservative Party frowns up tax evasion, it also upholds the view that this practice may be a response to unfavorable tax regimes within Canada. We believe that with fair taxation, there will be less desire on the part of some Canadians to look to other jurisdictions and to search for ways to avoid and evade Canadian taxation. Conservatives understand that when you make the tax rates fair, when you make the system easier to navigate, that encourages businesses to invest in Canada. When you increase taxes, such has been done with the recent payroll tax increases in the Canada Pension Plan, you discourage investment and you kill Canadian jobs. Investors, both domestic and foreign, are looking for a stable business climate where government understands the importance of allowing the private sector to lead job creation efforts. Creating an unstable business climate by, for example, unilaterally changing a long-standing international agreement is guaranteed to convince entrepreneurs that Canada is not worth the risk. I can see that the actions of this government, which has deferred the tax cut for small business to some mythical future dates, would cause many businesses to investigate opportunities in other jurisdictions that might provide more consistent tax policies. That Canadian corporations legally transferred a record amount to tax havens in 2015 can be seen as a resounding vote of non-confidence in the Liberal government. This indeed is a problem that should be addressed, but this motion is not the way to address it. Thank you.
Resuming debate, reprise the débat. The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased and honoured to have the opportunity to rise today to speak on Motion 42 regarding the Canada-Barbados income tax agreement. I want to thank the member from Joliet for bringing forward this bill. Madam Speaker, millions of hardworking Canadians pay their taxes in full every year, year after year. Meanwhile, some of the wealthiest people in this country are able to avoid paying their fair share by stashing billions of dollars in offshore tax havens. This unfair sweetheart deal for millionaire tax evaders is leaving less money for health care, infrastructure, transit, and other crucial public services all Canadians rely on. Motion M42 seeks to ensure that all Canadians, from billionaire corporations to single-income families, would pay the same fair taxation rules. Instead of executives from Petro-Canada enjoying a new yacht or luxury vacation thanks to the savings they benefited from due to filtering their money into tax havens, I'd prefer to see middle-class Canadians benefit. People in my riding at Courtenay, Alberni could certainly benefit, and people across this country. We look at the needs in our country. There's people living on the streets. We need money for homeless shelters. We've talked about a national child care program to help tackle inequality. This is billions of dollars that could pay for this important infrastructure and the needs we have in our communities. A pharmacare program. Aboriginal education we know is heavily underfunded, yet we're giving tax breaks to the rich. And Madam Speaker, the amount of money that these big corporations and CEOs are saving could be huge in investing in clean energy and tackling climate change. We have opportunities to move forward if we do the right thing, and that is to make sure that these big corporations are paying their fair share. The NDP has always fought for the rights of hardworking Canadians, and as a party, we wholeheartedly support the idea of fighting tax havens that cost Canadian taxpayers. We believe that the motion M42 by the member from Joliet is a good initiative for restoring Canadians' trust in our tax system and closing a multi-billion-dollar tax loophole. In 2014, an NDP MP tabled a private member's bill, Bill C-621, that sought amendments to make it easier for the government and the courts to identify, prosecute, and convict tax cheats who hide their money in tax havens. Peggy Nash said, in 2013, over the past 10 years, Canadians have invested over $390 billion in Barbados, which has a population of 284,000 people. They invested $175 billion in the Cayman Islands, which has a population of 55,000 people. Obviously, some of the money is absolutely above board and legitimate, but the money that is not legitimate means that the average middle-class family gets hammered and ends up paying more in taxes, plus getting less in government programs and services than they would otherwise if this money were adequately reported and taxed. Barbados has become the tax haven of choice for Canadian corporations and billionaires, ahead of other countries such as Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands. In 2007, there was a reported 33.4 billion Canadian dollars parked in Barbados tax havens. Move forward to 2008, it was $53.2 billion. And over the last 5 years, since 2011, it's gone from $45 billion to $108 billion being parked offshore. This is during, simultaneously, Canada has been lowering income tax rates for Canada's largest corporations. In the last 25 years, we've seen taxes being reduced from 28 to 15%. So corporations are getting a great tax break here at home, yet they're moving money offshore. When I think about my riding, I think about a third of the children living in poverty in the Alberni Valley, a fifth of the children, 20% of the children in the Comox Valley living in poverty, seniors in Oceanside living in poverty. The average income in my riding is $26,000 a year. And this government has brought forward a tax break for the middle class, while anyone earning $23 an hour working full-time or less gets nothing. That's 2/3 of Canadians, and it's more like 3/4 of the people living in Courtenay, Alberni. Madam Speaker, when we see tax breaks for CEOs that cost Canadian taxpayers $750 million a year, when we see corporations pushing money offshore and not paying their fair taxes, when we see so-called tax breaks for the middle class that benefit those the most that earn between $50 and $100 an hour, we know there's a problem. Madam Speaker, tax havens are not only unfair, but they're helping fuel growing inequality in Canada. We're seeing huge inequality, as we know, one of the biggest economic crises in our country today. And, Madam Speaker, this tax haven, this tax loophole, is the biggest economic leakage in Canada right now. And the government has an opportunity to take concrete action to prevent Canadian companies and taxpayers from using these loopholes to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. And according to 2015 Stats Can data compiled for Canadians for Tax Fairness, we know that the Caribbean island, Barbados, is now Canada's third top destination for foreign investment. This is after the United States and the United Kingdom. I want to thank the member from across the floor, the government member, for bringing forward the actions the government's going to take to try to deal with these tax loopholes around companies avoiding paying tax. But I think that it's one thing to invest in money for CRA to chase people that are avoiding paying tax. It's another thing to actually change laws so that we can actually make sure that it's illegal for those to move money into these tax havens. So we have an opportunity to change these agreements with other countries and close these tax loopholes. And there's a big difference between that and breaking the law, when right now it's legal, actually, to move money offshore. So I want to thank the member from Joliet for bringing this forward, because this is an important solution, and the government needs to look at legislation to do that, and this is the right legislation to get started with that. We know that there are many other deals that we have with other countries that also need to be looked at around the world, but this is an excellent start. Former Prime Minister Paul Martin registered companies in Barbados to avoid paying Canadian taxes. So no wonder the current Liberal government is so unclear regarding their policy on tax havens. And, I'll talk about another former Liberal, but he was, at the time, he was a New Democrat, because Bob Rae, at the time, and this is from CBC, he got up and said the government is entering into these tax treaties without being fully aware, this is in 1980, Madam Speaker, of the impact they will have on domestic taxation in Canada. Money that is income and not being taxed at the corporate level, on which the government receives no revenue, has the unfortunate effect of increasing the load of taxation on the average citizen. Isn't that true? In an era when we've got skyrocketing costs in healthcare, infrastructure costs that are soaring through the roof, when we're dealing with the need to address our greenhouse gas emissions, this is a really important time for us to plug this economic leakage and get on it. Dennis Howlett, the Executive Director of Canadians for Tax Fairness, sums this up perfectly. He said, "Isn't it just Donald Trump who likes to brag that it is smart to avoid paying taxes? Some Canadian multinationals and wealthy individuals are unapologetic about setting up shell companies or foundations in tax havens for no other reason than to avoid paying their fair share at home. In some, but not all cases, it's technically legal, but it contravenes the spirit of law and simply is not fair." And we got to talk about fairness, Madam Speaker, because when I talk about everyday Canadians, when I think about my friends at home, my friend Jennifer and John who run a whale watch company, or my friend Mike Madison who went to work this morning at the mill, or his wife Michelle, and I think about my friend Corey who's working on the golf course today, law-abiding Canadians from Qualicum Beach to Tofino that are doing everything they can to make sure they pay their fair share, to build a healthy Canada, while these corporations are taking the money out of the country. Madam Speaker, in closing, I believe that Motion 42, tabled by the member from Joliet, is a step in the right direction for restoring Canadians' trust in our tax system and closing this multi-billion-dollar tax loophole. However, while Barbados appears to be the tax haven of choice for Canadians, there are several other countries, including Panama, as we know, Turks and Caicos and Bermuda, with similar sneaky taxation agreements with Canada. Motion M42 is a good start, but it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to tax fairness for all Canadians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat. Droit de réplique, l'honorable député de Joliette.
The honourable member for Joliette. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased and proud to have brought this issue of fiscal tax havens to the House of Commons. Motion 42 is the first motion proposed by the Bloc in this Parliament, and there's a reason for that. I am an independentist. I am in favor of Quebec's independence, and I want Quebec to have full control, therefore, over issues that a sovereign country has control over, like tax treaties, which are the cornerstone of our tax systems these days, and Quebec can't do anything about that. The federal government has not closed the loopholes that enable profiteers to take advantage of tax havens, and therefore Quebec is losing income as well. The National Assembly of Quebec on April 14th adopted a resolution similar to my motion. And the real problem is in Quebec. All parties in the National Assembly want this to change, and they support my motion. Taxpayers have to pay for the taxes that aren't paid by others. As a social democrat, I can't accept that. There's no social justice without tax fairness, and there's no justice if people can divert their wealth. Quebec has had to cut homework help and childcare services because of a lack of revenues, and Canada and the federal government is cutting transfers. Bankers are increasing their profits in the Caribbean. There are three main banks, the Royal Bank, Scotiabank, and the CIBC, that accounted for 80% of the banking assets in Barbados, Grenada, and the Bahamas. In the 8 other tax havens composing the Caribbean Currency Union, Canadian banks account for 60% of the assets. Canada is not an economic superpower, but we are a superpower when it comes to tax havens, and with good reason, because the regulatory framework allows the banks and international companies to avoid paying their taxes here in Canada. I mentioned the regulatory framework because it is in the regulations that the problem exists. No tax treaty allows for tax havens, and even the treaty with Barbados doesn't cover the shell companies that have tax advantages in Barbados. And where the other 4 tax havens are concerned, Canada hasn't even signed a tax treaty with them. So it isn't a treaty that allows for this, but rather the government in its regulations. Parliament never allowed for tax havens. Parliamentarians have done their work. They made these tax havens illegal, but the government has not done the work it needs to do in the regulations. The regulations indicate that the laws and treaties that were passed in Parliament are not enforced, and the banks can have their profits exempted by transferring them to the Caribbean. So if my motion is defeated, it would be the first time that the will of Parliament was subverted in this way. And so I'm confident that we can take action if we adopt my motion. We don't accept that there should be this possibility for tax avoidance through tax havens. The government has to repeal Regulation 5907. When people vote at this historic occasion, we need to vote against tax havens, and I hope that we will be on the right side of history. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is as follows. Monsieur Sainte-Marie, appuyé par
Mr. Sainte-Marie moves that, in the opinion of the House, the government should put an end to the widespread tax avoidance practiced by many shell companies set up in Barbados by Canadian companies by amending subsection 95(1) of the Income Tax Act and Section 5907 of the Income Tax Regulations to specify that no business that is entitled to a special tax benefit conferred by Barbados under the Canada-Barbados Income Tax Agreement Act 1980 shall be exempt from taxation because of a tax treaty.
House to adopt the motion. Que tous ceux qui appuient.
All those in favor of the motion, please say yea.
Que tous ceux qui.
All those opposed, please say nay.
À mon avis, les dons l'ont.
In my opinion, the nays have it.
Pursuant to Standing Order 93, the recorded division stands deferred until Wednesday, October 26, 2016, immediately before the time provided for private members' business. It being 2:03, this House stands adjourned until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1. Have a great weekend.